Chapter 12 of Company Aytch by Sam R. Watkins. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 100 Days Battle. Rocky Face Ridge. When I got back to Dalton, I found the Yankee army advancing. They were at Rocky Face Ridge. Now for Old Joe's generalship. We have seen him in camp. Now we will see him in action. We are marched to meet the enemy. We occupy Turner's Gap at Tunnel Hill. Now come on, Mr. Yank, we are keen for engagement. It is like a picnic. The soldiers are ruddy and fat and strong. Whoop, whoop, hurrah! Come on, Mr. Yank. We form line of battle on top of Rocky Face Ridge, and here we are face to face with the enemy. Why don't you unbottle your thunderbolts and dash us to pieces? Ha! Here it comes, the boom of cannon and the bursting of a shell in our midst. Ha! Ha! Give us another blizzard. Boom! Boom! That's all right. You ain't hurting nothing. Hold on, boys, says the sharpshooter, armed with a Whitworth gun. I'll stop that racket. Wait till I see her smoke again. Boom! Boom! The keen crack of the Whitworth rings upon the frosty morning air. The cannoneers are seen to lie down. Something is going on. Yes, yonder is a fellow being carried off on a litter. Bang! Bang! goes the Whitworth, and the battery is seen to limber to the rear. What next? A yell. What does this yell mean? A charge right up the hill and a little sharp skirmish for a few moments. We can see the Yankee line. They are resting on their arms. The valley below is full of blue coats, but a little too far off to do any execution. Old Joe walks along the line. He happens to see the blue coats in the valley in plain view. Company H is ordered to fire on them. We take deliberate aim and fire a solid volley of Minnie balls into their midst. We see a terrible consplutterment upon them, and know that we have killed and wounded several of Sherman's incendiaries. They seem to get mad at our audacity, and 10 pieces of cannon are brought up and pointed right toward us. We see the smoke boil up, and a moment afterwards the shell is roaring and bursting right among us. Ha, ha, ha! That's funny. We love the noise of battle. Captain Joe P. Lee orders us to load and fire at will upon these batteries. Our Enfields crack, keen and sharp, and ha, ha, ha! Look yonder! The Yankees are running away from their cannon, leaving 2 pieces to take care of themselves. Yonder goes a dash of our cavalry. They are charging right up in the midst of the Yankee line. 3 men are far in advance. Look out, boys! What does that mean? Our cavalry are falling back, and the 3 men are cut off. They will be captured, sure. They turn to get back to our lines. We can see the smoke boil up and hear the discharge of musketry from the Yankee lines. 1 man's horse is seen to blunder and fall. 1 man reels in his saddle and falls, a corpse, and the other is seen to surrender. But look yonder, the man's horse that blundered and fell is up again. He mounts his horse in 50 yards of the whole Yankee line, is seen to lie down on his neck, and is spurring him right on toward the solid line of blue coats. Look how he rides, and the ranks of the blue coats open. Hurrah for the brave rebel boy! He has passed and is seen to regain his regiment. I afterwards learned that brave rebel boy was my own brother Dave, who at that time was not more than 16 years old. The one who was killed was named Grimes, and the one captured was named Hauser, and the regiment was the 1st Tennessee Cavalry, then commanded by Colonel J. H. Lewis. You could have heard the cheers from both sides, it seemed, for miles. John Branch raised the tune in which the whole 1st and 27th Regiments joined in. Cheer, boys, cheer, we are marching on to battle. Cheer, boys, cheer, for our sweethearts and our wives. Cheer, boys, cheer, we'll nobly do our duty, and give to the South our hearts, our arms, our lives. Old Lincoln with his hireling hosts will never whip the South, shouting the battle cry of freedom. All this is taking place while the Yankees are fully 1,000 yards off. We can see every movement that is made, and we know that Sherman's incendiaries are already hacked. Sherman himself is a coward and dares not try his strength with Old Joe. Sherman never fights. All that he is after is marching to the sea while the world looks on and wonders, what a flank movement. Yes, Sherman is afraid of Minnie balls and tries the flank movement. We are ordered to march somewhere. Falling back. Old Joe knows what he is up to. Every night we change our position. The morrow's sun finds us face to face with the Yankee lines. The troops are in excellent spirits. Yonder are our big guns, our cavalry, Forrest and Wheeler, our sharpshooters, and here is our wagon and supply train right in the midst. The private's tread is light, his soul is happy. Another flank movement. Tomorrow finds us face to face. Well, you have come to fight us. Why don't you come on? We are ready, always ready. Everything is working like clockwork. Machinery is all in order. Come, give us a tilt, and let us try our mettle. You say old Joe has got the brains, and you have got the men. You are going to flank us out of the Southern Confederacy. That's your plan, is it? Well, look out. We are going to pick off and decimate your men every day. You'll be a picked chicken before you do that. What? The Yankees are at Resaca, and have captured the bridge across the Oostanawli River. Well, now, that's business. That has the old ring in it. Tell it to us again. We're fond of hearing such things. The Yankees are tearing up the railroad track between the tank and Resaca. Let's hear it again. The Yankees have opened the attack. We are going to have a battle. We are ordered to strip for the fight. That is, to take off our knapsacks and blankets, and to detail Bev White to guard 'em. Keep closed up, men. The skirmish line is firing like popping firecrackers on a Christmas morning. Every now and then the boom of a cannon and the screaming of a shell. Ha, ha, ha! That has the right ring. We will make Sherman's incendiaries tell another tale in a few moments when... Halt! About face! Well, what's the matter now? Simply a flank movement. All right, we march back, retake our knapsacks and blankets, and commence to march towards Resaca. Tom Tucker's rooster crows, and John Branch raises the tune just 20 years ago, and after we sing that out he winds up with, "There was an ancient individual whose cognomen was Uncle Edward, and the old woman who kept a peanut stand, and a big policeman stood by with a big stick in his hand." And Arthur Fulghum halloos out, "All right, go ahead, toot, 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 puff, puff, puff. Tickets, gentlemen, tickets." And the Maury Grays raise the yell, "All aboard for Culleoke," while Walter Coleman commences the song, "I's gwine to join the rebel band, fighting for my home." Thus we go, marching back to Resaca. Battle of Resaca. Well, you want to hear about shooting and banging now, gentle reader, don't you? I am sorry I cannot interest you on this subject. See history. The Yankees had got Britch's hold on us. They were 10 miles in our rear, had cut off our possibility of a retreat. The wire bridge was in their hands, and they were on the railroad in our rear. But we were moving. There was no mistake in that. Our column was firm and strong. There was no excitement, but we were moving along as if on review. We passed old Joe and his staff. He has on a light or mole-colored hat with a black feather in it. He is listening to the firing going on at the front. One little cheer, and the very ground seems to shake with cheers. Old Joe smiles as blandly as a modest maid, raises his hat in acknowledgment, makes a polite bow, and rides toward the firing. Soon we are thrown into line of battle in support of Polk's corps. We belong to Hardee's corps. Now Polk's corps advances to the attack, and Hardee's corps 50 or 75 yards in the rear. A thug, thug, thug. The balls are decimating our men. We can't fire. Polk's corps is in front of us. Should it give way, then it will be our time. The air is full of deadly missiles. We can see the two lines meet, and hear the deadly crash of battle, can see the blaze of smoke and fire. The earth trembles. Our little corps rush in to carry off our men as they are shot down, killed, and wounded. Lie down! Thug! Thug! General Hardee passes along the line. Steady, boys. The old general had on a white cravat. He had been married to a young wife not more than 3 weeks. "Go back, General! Go back! Go back! Go back!" is cried all along the line. "He passed us through the missiles of death unscathed, stood all through that storm of bullets, indifferent to their proximity. We were lying down, you know. The enemy is checked. Yonder they fly, whipped and driven from the field. Attention! By the right flank! Fly left! March! Double quick!" And we were double quicking we knew not whither, but that always meant fight. We pass over the hill and through the valley, and there is old Joe pointing towards the tank with his sword. He looked like the pictures you see hung upon the walls. We cross the railroad. Halloo! Here comes a cavalry charge from the Yankee line. Now for it. We will see how Yankee cavalry fight. We are not supported. What is the matter? Are we going to be captured? They thunder down upon us. Their flat-footed dragoons shake and jar the earth. They are all around us. We are surrounded. Form square, platoons right and left, wheel, kneel, and fire. There we were in a hollow square. The Yankees had never seen anything like that before. It was something new. They charged right upon us. Colonel Field, sitting on his gray mare, right in the center of the hollow square, gives the command, "Front rank, kneel and present bayonet against cavalry." The front rank knelt down, placing the butts of their guns against their knees. "Rear rank, fire at will. Commence firing." Now all this happened in less time than it has taken me to write it. They charged right upon us, no doubt expecting to ride right over us and trample us to death with the hoofs of their horses. They tried to spur and whip their horses over us, but the horses had more sense than that. We were pouring a deadly fire right into their faces, and soon men and horses were writhing in the death agonies. Officers were yelling at the top of their voices, "Surrender! Surrender!" But we were having too good a thing of it. We were killing them by scores, and they could not fire at us. If they did, they either overshot or missed their aim. Their ranks soon began to break and get confused, and finally they were routed, and broke and ran in all directions as fast as their horses could carry them. When we reformed our regiment and marched back, we found that General Johnson's army had all passed over the bridge at Resaca. Now, reader, this was one of our tight places. The 1st Tennessee Regiment was always ordered to hold tight places, which we always did. We were about the last troops that passed over. Now, gentle reader, that is all I know of the Battle of Resaca. We had repulsed every charge, had crossed the bridge with every wagon and cannon and everything, and had nothing lost or captured. It beat anything that has ever been recorded in history. I wondered why old Joe did not attack in their rear. The explanation was that Hood's line was being enfiladed, his men decimated, and he could not hold his position. We are still fighting, battles innumerable. The Yankees had thrown pontoons across the river below Resaca in hopes to intercept us on the other side. We were marching on the road. They seemed to be marching parallel with us. It was fighting, fighting every day. When we awoke in the morning, the firing of guns was our reveille, and when the sun went down, it was our retreat and our lights out. Fighting, 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 all day and all night long. Battles were fought every day, and in one respect we always had the advantage. They were the attacking party, and we always had good breastworks thrown up during the night. Johnson's army was still intact. The soldiers drew their regular rations of biscuit and bacon, sugar and coffee, whiskey and tobacco. When we went to sleep, we felt that old Joe, the faithful old watchdog, had his eye on the enemy. No one was disposed to straggle and go back to Company Q. Company Q was the name for playouts. They even felt safer in the regular line than in the rear with Company Q. Well, as stated previously, it was battle, battle, battle every day for 100 days. The boom of cannon and the rattle of musketry was our reveille and retreat, and Sherman knew that it was no child's play. Today, April 14th, 1882, I say and honestly say that I sincerely believe the combined forces of the whole Yankee nation could have never broken General Joseph E. Johnson's line of battle, beginning at Rocky Face Ridge and ending on the banks of the Chattahoochee. Adairsville, Octagon House. The 1st Tennessee always occupies tight places. We had stacked our arms and gone into camp, and had started to build fires to cook supper. I saw our cavalry falling back, I thought, rather hurriedly. I ran to the road and asked them what was the matter. They answered, "Matter enough. Yonder are the Yankees. Are you infantry fellows going to make a stand here?" I told Colonel Field what had been told to me, and he hooted at the idea. But balls that had shucks tied to their tails were passing over, and our regiment was in the rear of the whole army. I could hardly draw anyone's attention to the fact that the cavalry had passed us, and that we were on the outpost of the whole army, when an order came for our regiment to go forward as rapidly as possible and occupy an octagon house in our immediate front. The Yankees were about 100 yards from the house on one side, and we about 100 yards on the other. The race commenced as to which side would get to the house first. We reached it and had barely gotten in when they were bursting down the paling of the yard on the opposite side. The house was a fine brick, octagon in shape, and as perfect a fort as could be desired. We ran to the windows upstairs, downstairs, and in the cellar. The Yankees cheered and charged, and our boys got happy. Colonel Field told us he had orders to hold it until every man was killed, and never to surrender the house. It was a forlorn hope. We felt we were gone fawn skins, sure enough. At every discharge of our guns we would hear a Yankee squall. The boys raised a tune, "I's gwine to jine the rebel band, a-fighting for my home," as they loaded and shot their guns. Then the tune of "Cheer, boys, cheer! We are marching on to battle! Cheer, boys, cheer! For our sweethearts and our wives! Cheer, boys, cheer! We'll nobly do our duty, and give to the South our hearts, our arms, our lives." Our cartridges were almost gone, and Lieutenant Joe Carney, Joe Sewell, and Billy Carr volunteered to go and bring a box of 1,000 cartridges. They got out of the back window, and through that hail of iron and lead made their way back with a box of cartridges. Our ammunition being renewed, the fight raged on. Captain Joe P. Lee touched me on the shoulder and said, "Sam, please let me have your gun for one shot." He raised it to his shoulder and pulled down on a fine-dressed cavalry officer, and I saw that Yankee tumble. He handed it back to me to reload. About 12 o'clock midnight, the 154th Tennessee, commanded by Colonel McGevney, came to our relief. The firing had ceased, and we abandoned the Octagon House. Our dead and wounded, there were 30 of them, were in strange contrast with the furniture of the house, fine chairs, sofas, settees, pianos, and Brussels carpeting being made the deathbed of brave and noble boys, all saturated with blood. Fine lace and damask curtains all blackened by the smoke of battle. Fine bureaus and looking-glasses and furniture being riddled by the rude missiles of war. Beautiful pictures in gilt frames, and a library of valuable books, all shot and torn by musket and cannon balls. Such is war. Kennesaw Line. The battles of the Kennesaw Line were fought for weeks. Cannonading and musketry firing was one continual thing. It seemed that shooting was the order of the day, and pickets on both sides kept up a continual firing that sounded like 10,000 wood-choppers. Sometimes the wood-choppers would get lazy or tired, and there was a lull, but you could always tell when the old guard had been relieved by the accelerated chops of the wood-choppers. Am detailed to go into the enemy's lines. One day our orderly sergeant informed me that it was my regular time to go on duty, and to report to Captain Beasley of the 27th. I reported to the proper place, and we were taken to the headquarters of General Leonidas Polk. We had to go over into the enemy's lines and make such observations as we could and report back by daylight in the morning. Our instructions were to leave everything in camp except our guns and cartridge boxes. These were to be carried, but under no circumstances to be used, except in case of death itself. We were instructed to fall in the rear of our relief guard, which would go out about sunset, not to attract their attention, but to drop out one or two at a time, to pass the Yankee picket as best we could, even if we had to crawl on our bellies to do so, to go over in the Yankee lines, and to find out all we could without attracting attention, if possible. These were our instructions. You may be sure my heart beat like a muffled drum when I heard our orders. I felt like making my will. But, like the boy who was passing the graveyard, I tried to whistle to keep my spirits up. We followed the relief guard, and one by one stepped off from the rear. I was with two others, Arnold Zellner and T.C. Dornan. We found ourselves between the picket lines of the two armies. Fortune seemed to favor us. It was just getting dusky twilight, and we saw the relief guard of the Yankees just putting on their picket. They seemed to be very mild, inoffensive fellows. They kept a-looking over toward the rebel lines and would dodge if a twig cracked under their feet. I walked on as if I was just relieved and had passed their lines, when I turned back and says I, "Captain, what guard is this?" He answered, "Nein Buch, you bet," is what I understood him to say. "What regiment are you from?" "Ben bist mir ein Riffelfahrt bin." "What regiment is your detail from?" "Ich du mein Gott Donnermetal Stiefel Schweizer." I had to give it up. I had run across the detail of a Dutch regiment. I passed on and came to the regular line of breastworks, and there was an old Irishman sitting on a stump grinding coffee. "General McCook's brigade, be jabbers," he answered to my inquiry as to what regiment it was. Right in front of me the line was full of Irish soldiers, and they were cooking supper. I finally got over their breastworks and was fearful I would run into some camp or headquarter guard, and the countersign would be demanded of me. I did not know what to do in that case, but I thought of the way that I had gotten in hundreds of times before in our army when I wanted to slip the guard, and that was to get a gun, go to some cross street or conspicuous place, halt the officer, and get the countersign. And while standing near General Sherman's headquarters, I saw a courier come out of his tent, get on his horse, and ride toward where I stood. As he approached, says I, "Halt! Who goes there?" "A friend with a countersign." He advanced and whispered in my ear the word united." He rode on. "I had gotten their countersign, and I felt I was no longer a prisoner. I went all over their camp and saw no demonstration of any kind. Night had thrown her mantle over the encampment. I could plainly see the sentinels on their weary vigils along the lines, but there was none in their rear. I met and talked with a great many soldiers, but could get no information from them. About 2 o'clock at night I saw a body of men approaching where I was. Something told me that I had better get out of their way, but I did not. The person in command said, 'Say there, you, sir. Say, you, sir.' Says I, 'Are you speaking to me?' 'Yes,' very curtly and abruptly. 'What regiment do you belong to?' Says I, 127th Illinois. 'Well, sir, fall in here. I am ordered to take up all stragglers. Fall in promptly.' Says I, 'I'm instructed by General McCook to remain here and direct a courier to General Williams' headquarters.' He says, 'It's a strange place for a courier to come to.' His command marched on. About an hour afterwards, about 3 o'clock, I heard the assembly sound. I knew then that it was about time for me to be getting out of the way. Soon their companies were forming, and they were calling the roll everywhere. Everything had begun to stir. Artillerymen were hitching up their horses. Men were dashing about in every direction. I saw their army form and move off. I got back into our lines and reported to General Polk. He was killed that very day on the Kennesaw line. General Stevens was killed the very next day. Every now and then a dead picket was brought in. Times had begun to look bilious indeed. Their cannon seemed to be getting the best of ours in every fight. The cannons of both armies were belching and bellowing at each other, and the pickets were going it like wood choppers in earnest. We were entrenched behind strong fortifications. Our rations were cooked and brought to us regularly, and the spirits of the army were in good condition. We continued to change position and build new breastworks every night. 1/3 of the army had to keep awake in the trenches while the other 2/3 slept, but everything was so systematized that we did not feel the fatigue. Pine Mountain. Death of General Leonidas Polk. General Leonidas Polk, our old leader, whom we had followed all through that long war, had gone forward with some of his staff to the top of Pine Mountain to reconnoiter, as far as was practicable, the position of the enemy in our front. While looking at them with his field glass, a solid shot from the Federal guns struck him on his left breast, passing through his body and through his heart. I saw him while the infirmary corps were bringing him off the field. He was as white as a piece of marble. And the most remarkable thing about him was that not a drop of blood was ever seen to come out of the place through which the cannon ball had passed. My pen and ability is inadequate to the task of doing his memory justice. Every private soldier loved him. Second to Stonewall Jackson, his loss was the greatest the South ever sustained. When I saw him there dead, I felt that I had lost a friend whom I had ever loved and respected, and that the South had lost one of her best and greatest generals. His soldiers always loved and honored him. They called him Bishop Polk. Bishop Polk was ever a favorite with the army, and when any position was to be held, and it was known that Bishop Polk was there, we knew and felt that all was well. Golgotha Church. General Lucius E. Polk wounded. On this Kennesaw line, near Golgotha Church, one evening about 4 o'clock, our Confederate line of battle and the Yankee line came in close proximity. If I mistake not, it was a dark, drizzly, rainy evening. The cannon balls were ripping and tearing through the bushes. The two lines were in plain view of each other. General Pat Cleburne was at this time commanding Hardee's corps, and General Lucius E. Polk was in command of Cleburne's division. General John C. Brown's division was supporting Cleburne's division, or rather, in echelon. Every few moments a raking fire from the Yankee lines would be poured into our lines, tearing limbs off the trees and throwing rocks and dirt in every direction, but I never saw a soldier quail or even dodge. We had confidence in old Joe, and were ready to march right into the midst of battle at a moment's notice. While in this position, a bomb, loaded with shrapnel and grape shot, came ripping and tearing through our ranks, wounding General Lucius E. Polk and killing some of his staff. And right here, I deem it not inappropriate to make a few remarks as to the character and appearance of so brave and gallant an officer. At this time he was about 25 years old, with long black hair that curled, a gentle and attractive black eye that seemed to sparkle with love rather than chivalry, and were it not for a young mustache and the goatee that he usually wore, he would have passed for a beautiful girl. In his manner he was as simple and guileless as a child, and generous almost to a fault. Enlisting in the 1st Arkansas Regiment as a private soldier, and serving for 12 months as orderly sergeant, at the reorganization he was elected colonel of the regiment, and afterwards, on account of merit and ability, was commissioned brigadier general. Distinguishing himself for conspicuous bravery and gallantry on every battlefield, and being scalped by a Minnie ball at Richmond, Kentucky, which scar marks its furrow on top of his head today. In every battle he was engaged in, he led his men to victory, or held the enemy at bay while the surge of battle seemed against us. He always seemed the successful general who would snatch victory out of the very jaws of defeat. In every battle, Polk's brigade of Cleburne's division distinguished itself, almost making the name of Cleburne as the Stonewall of the West. Polk was to Cleburne what Murat or the Old Guard was to Napoleon, and at the Battle of Chickamauga, when it seemed that the Southern army had nearly lost the battle, General Lucius E. Polk's brigade made the most gallant charge of the war, turning the tide of affairs and routing the Yankee army. General Polk himself led the charge in person, and was the first man on top of the Yankee breastworks, vide General D.H. Hill's report of the Battle of Chickamauga. And in every attack he had the advanced guard, and in every retreat the rear guard of the army. Why? Because General Lucius E. Polk and his brave soldiers never faltered, and with him as leader, the general commanding the army knew that all was well. Well, this evening of which I now write, the litter corps ran up and placed him on a litter, and were bringing him back through Company H of our regiment, when one of the men was wounded, and I am not sure but another one was killed, and they let him fall to the ground. At that time the Yankees seemed to know that they had killed or wounded a general, and tore loose their batteries upon this point. The dirt and rocks were flying in every direction, when Captain Joe P. Lee, Jim Brandon, and myself ran forward, grabbed up the litter, brought General Polk off the crest of the hill, and assisted in carrying him to the headquarters of General Cleburne. When we got to General Cleburne, he came forward and asked General Polk if he was badly wounded, and General Polk remarked, laughingly, "Well, I think I will be able to get a furlough now." This is a fact. General Polk's leg had been shot almost entirely off. I remember the foot part being twisted clear around and lying by his side, while the blood was running through the litter in a perfect stream. I remember also that General Cleburne dashed a tear from his eye with his hand, and saying, "Poor fellow," at once galloped to the front and ordered an immediate advance of our lines. Cleburne's division was soon engaged. Night coming on prevented a general engagement, but we drove the Yankee line 2 miles. Dead Angle. The 1st and 27th Tennessee Regiments will ever remember the Battle of Dead Angle, which was fought June 27th on the Kennesaw line near Marietta, Georgia. It was one of the hottest and longest days of the year, and one of the most desperate and determinedly resisted battles fought during the whole war. Our regiment was stationed on an angle, a little spur of the mountain, or rather promontory of a range of hills, extending far out beyond the main line of battle, and was subject to the enfilading fire of 40 pieces of artillery of the Federal batteries. It seemed fun for the guns of the whole Yankee army to play upon this point. We would work hard every night to strengthen our breastworks, and the very next day they would be torn down smooth with the ground by solid shots and shells from the guns of the enemy. Even the little trees and bushes which had been left for shade were cut down as so much stubble. For more than a week this constant firing had been kept up against this salient point. In the meantime the skirmishing in the valley below resembled the sounds made by 10,000 wood choppers. Well, on the fatal morning of June 27th, the sun rose clear and cloudless, the heavens seemed made of brass, and the earth of iron, and as the sun began to mount toward the zenith, everything became quiet, and no sound was heard save a peckerwood on a neighboring tree tapping on its old trunk, trying to find a worm for its dinner. We all knew it was but the dead calm that precedes the storm. On the distant hills we could plainly see officers dashing around hither and thither, and the stars and stripes moving to and fro, and we knew the Federals were making preparations for the mighty contest. We could hear but the rumbling sound of heavy guns, and the distant tread of marching army, as a faint roar of the coming storm, which was soon to break the ominous silence with a sound of conflict such was scarcely ever before heard on this earth. It seemed that the archangel of death stood and looked on with outstretched wings, while all the earth was silent, when all at once 100 guns from the Federal line opened upon us, and for more than an hour they poured their solid and chain shot, grape and shrapnel right upon this salient point defended by our regiment alone, when all of a sudden our pickets jumped into our works and reported the Yankees advancing, and almost at the same time a solid line of bluecoats came up the hill. I discharged my gun, and happening to look up, there was the beautiful flag of the Stars and Stripes flaunting right in my face, and I heard John Branch, of the Rock City Guards, commanded by Captain W.D. Kelly, who were next Company Aytch, say, "Look at that Yankee flag! Shoot that fellow! Snatch that flag out of his hand!" My pen is unable to describe the scene of carnage and death that ensued in the next 2 hours. Column after column of Federal soldiers were crowded upon that line, and by referring to the history of the war, you will find that they were massed in column 40 columns deep. In fact, the whole force of the Yankee army was hurled against this point. But no sooner would a regiment mount our works than they were shot down or surrendered, and soon we had every gopher hole full of Yankee prisoners. Yet still the Yankees came. It seemed impossible to check the onslaught, but every man was true to his trust, and seemed to think that at that moment the whole responsibility of the Confederate government was rested upon his shoulders. Talk about other battles, victories, shouts, cheers, and triumphs, but in comparison with this day's fight, all others dwarf into insignificance. The sun beaming down on our uncovered heads, the thermometer being 110 degrees in the shade, and a solid line of blazing fire right from the muzzles of the Yankee guns being poured right into our very faces, singeing our hair and clothes, the hot blood of our dead and wounded spurting on us, the blinding smoke and stifling atmosphere filling our eyes and mouths, and the awful concussion causing the blood to gush out of our noses and ears, and above all, the roar of battle made it a perfect pandemonium. Afterward I heard a soldier express himself by saying that he thought hell had broke loose in Georgia, sure enough. I have heard men say that if they ever killed a Yankee during the war, they were not aware of it. I am satisfied that on this memorable day every man in our regiment killed from 100 to 80, yea, 50 men. I mean from 20 to 100 each. All that was necessary was to load and shoot. In fact, I will ever think that the reason they did not capture our works was the impossibility of their living men passing over the bodies of their dead. The ground was piled up with one solid mass of dead and wounded Yankees. I learned afterwards from the burying squad that in some places they were piled up like cordwood, 12 deep. After they were time and time again beaten back, they at last were enabled to fortify a line under the crest of the hill, only 30 yards from us, and they immediately commenced to excavate the earth with the purpose of blowing up our line. We remained there 3 days after the battle. In the meantime the woods had taken fire, and during the nights and days of all that time continued to burn, and at all times, every hour of day and night, you could hear the shrieks and screams of the poor fellows who were left on the field, and a stench so sickening as to nauseate the whole of both armies arose from the decaying bodies of the dead left lying on the field. On the 3rd morning, the Yankees raised a white flag, asked an armistice to bury their dead, not for any respect either army had for the dead, but to get rid of the sickening stench. I get sick now when I happen to think about it. Long and deep trenches were dug, and hooks made from bayonets crooked for the purpose, and all the dead were dragged and thrown pell-mell into these trenches. Nothing was allowed to be taken off the dead, and finely dressed officers with gold watch chains dangling over their vests were thrown into the ditches. During the whole day both armies were hard at work burying the Federal dead. Every member of the 1st and 27th Tennessee Regiments deserves a wreath of imperishable fame and a warm place in the hearts of their countrymen for their gallant and heroic valor at the Battle of Dead Angle. No man distinguished himself above another. All did their duty, and the glory of one is but the glory and just tribute of the others. After we had abandoned the line, and on coming to a little stream of water, I undressed for the purpose of bathing, and after undressing found my arm all battered and bruised and bloodshot from my wrist to my shoulder and as sore as a blister. I had shot 120 times that day. My gun became so hot that frequently the powder would flash before I could ram home the ball, and I had frequently to exchange my gun for that of a dead comrade. Colonel H.R. Field was loading and shooting the same as any private in the ranks, when he fell off the skid from which he was shooting right over my shoulder, shot through the head. I laid him down in the trench, and he said, "Well, they have got me at last, but I have killed 15 of them. Time about is fair play, I reckon." But Colonel Field was not killed, only wounded, and one side paralyzed. Captain Joe P. Lee, Captain Mac Campbell, Lieutenant T.H. Maney, and other officers of the regiment threw rocks and beat them in their faces with sticks. The Yankees did the same. The rocks came in upon us like a perfect hailstorm, and the Yankees seemed very obstinate and in no hurry to get away from our front, and we had to keep up the firing and shooting them down in self-defense. They seemed to walk up and take death as coolly as if they were automatic or wooden men, and our boys did not shoot for the fun of the thing. It was verily a life-and-death grapple, and the least flicker on our part would have been sure death to all. We could not be reinforced on account of our position, and we had to stand up to the rack, fodder or no fodder. When the Yankees fell back and the firing ceased, I never saw so many broken down and exhausted men in my life. I was as sick as a horse, and as wet with blood and sweat as I could be, and many of our men were vomiting with excessive fatigue, over-exhaustion, and sunstroke. Our tongues were parched and cracked for water, and our faces blackened with powder and smoke, and our dead and wounded were piled indiscriminately in the trenches. There was not a single man in the company who was not wounded, or had holes shot through his hat and clothing. Captain Beasley was killed, and nearly all his company killed and wounded. The Rock City Guards were almost piled in heaps, and so was our company. Captain Joe P. Lee was badly wounded. Poor Walter Hood and Jim Brandon were lying there among us, while their spirits were in heaven. Also William A. Hughes, my old messmate and friend, who had clerked with me for S.F. and J.M. Mays, and who had slept with me for, lo, these many years, and a boy who loved me more than any other person on earth has ever done. I had just discharged the contents of my gun into the bosoms of 2 men, one right behind the other, killing them both, and was reloading, when a Yankee rushed upon me, having me at a disadvantage, and said, "You have killed my 2 brothers, and now I've got you." Everything I had ever done rushed through my mind. I heard the roar, and felt the flash of fire, and saw my more than friend, William A. Hughes, grab the muzzle of the gun, receiving the whole contents in his hand and arm, and mortally wounding him. Reader, he died for me. In saving my life, he lost his own. When the infirmary corps carried him off, all mutilated and bleeding, he told them to give me Florence Fleming, that was the name of his gun which he had put on it in silver letters, and to give me his blanket and clothing. He gave his life for me and everything that he had. It was the last time that I ever saw him. But I know that away up yonder, beyond the clouds, blackness, tempest, and night, and away above the blue vault of heaven, where the stars keep their ceaseless vigils, away up yonder in the golden city of the New Jerusalem, where God and Jesus Christ our Savior ever reign, we will sometime meet at the marriage supper of the Son of God, who gave his life for the redemption of the whole world. For several nights they made attacks upon our lines, but in every attempt they were driven back with great slaughter. They would ignite the tape of bomb shells and throw them over in our lines, but if the shell did not immediately explode, they were thrown back. They had a little shell called hand grenade, but they would either stop short of us or go over our heads and were harmless. General Joseph E. Johnson sent us a couple of chevaux de frise. When they came, a detail of 3 men had to roll them over the works. Those 3 men were heroes. Their names were Edmund Brandon, T.C. Dornan, and Arnold Zellner. Although it was a solemn occasion, every one of us was convulsed with laughter at the ridiculous appearance and actions of the detail. Every one of them made their wills and said their prayers truthfully and honestly before they undertook the task. I laugh now every time I think of the ridiculous appearance of the detail, but to them it was no laughing matter. I will say that they were men who feared not nor faltered in their duty. They were men, and today deserve the thanks of the people of the South. That night about midnight an alarm was given that the Yankees were advancing. They would only have to run about 20 yards before they would be in our works. We were ordered to shoot. Every man was hallooing at the top of his voice, "Shoot! Shoot! T! Shoot! Shoot T!" On the alarm, both the Confederate and Federal lines opened, with both small arms and artillery, and it seemed that the very heavens and earth were in a grand conflagration, as they will be at the final judgment after the resurrection. I have since learned that this was a false alarm, and that no attack had been meditated. Previous to the day of attack, the soldiers had cut down all the trees in our immediate front, throwing the tops downhill and sharpening the limbs of the same, thus making, as we thought, an impenetrable abatis of vines and limbs locked together. But nothing stopped or could stop the advance of the Yankee line but the hot shot and cold steel that we poured into their faces from under our headlogs. One of the most shameful and cowardly acts of Yankee treachery was committed there that I ever remember to have seen. A wounded Yankee was lying right outside of our works, and begging most piteously for water, when a member of the railroad company, his name was Hog Johnson, and the very man who stood vidette with Theodore Sloan and I at the Battle of Missionary Ridge, and who killed the 3 Yankees one night from Fort Horsley, got a canteen of water and gave the dying Yankee a drink. And as he started back, he was killed dead in his tracks by a treacherous Yankee hid behind a tree. It matters not, for somewhere in God's holy word, which cannot lie, he says that he who giveth a cup of cold water in my name shall not lose his reward. And I have no doubt, reader, in my own mind, that the poor fellow is reaping his reward in Emmanuel's land with the good and just. In every instance where we tried to assist their wounded, our men were killed or wounded. A poor wounded and dying boy, not more than 16 years of age, asked permission to crawl over our works, and when he had crawled over the top, and just as Blair Webster and I reached up to help the poor fellow, he, the Yankee, was killed by his own men. In fact, I have ever thought that is why the slaughter was so great in our front, that nearly, if not as many, Yankees were killed by their own men as by us. The brave ones who tried to storm and carry our works were simply between 2 fires. It is a singular fanaticism and curious fact that enters the mind of a soldier, that it is a grand and glorious death to die on a victorious battlefield. One morning the 6th and 9th regiments came to our assistance, not to relieve us, but only to assist us, and every member of our regiment, 1st and 27th, got as mad as a wet hen. They felt almost insulted, and I believe we would soon have been in a free fight had they not been ordered back. As soon as they came up, every one of us began to say, "Go back, go back, we can hold this place, and by the eternal God, we are not going to leave it." General Johnson came there to look at the position, and told us that a transverse line was about 100 yards in our rear, and should they come on us too heavy, to fall back to that line, when almost every one of us said, "You go back and look at other lines. This place is safe and can never be taken." And then when they had dug a tunnel under us to blow us up, we laughed, yea, even rejoiced at the fact of soon being blown sky high. Yet not a single man was willing to leave his post. When old Joe sent us the 2 chevaux de frise, and kept on sending us water and rations and whiskey and tobacco and word to hold our line, we would inevitably send word back to rest easy, and that all is well at Dead Angle. I have ever thought that this is one reason why General Johnson fell back from this Kennesaw line, and I will say today, in 1882, that while we appreciated his sympathies and kindness toward us, yet we did not think hard of old Joe for having so little confidence in us at that time. A perfect hail of Minnie balls was being continually poured into our headlogs the whole time we remained there. The Yankees would hold up small looking-glasses, so that our strength and breastworks could be seen in the reflection in the glass. And they also had small mirrors on the butts of their guns, so arranged that they could sight up the barrels of their guns by looking through these glasses, while they themselves would not be exposed to our fire. And they kept up this continual firing day and night, whether they could see us or not. Sometimes a glancing shot from our headlogs would wound someone. But I cannot describe it as I would wish. I would be pleased to mention the name of every soldier, not only of Company Aytch alone, but every man in the 1st and 27th Tennessee Consolidated Regiments on this occasion. But I cannot now remember their names, and will not mention any one in particular, fearing to do injustice to some whom I might inadvertently omit. Every man and every company did their duty. Company G, commanded by Captain Mac Campbell, stood side by side with us on this occasion, as they ever had through the whole war. But soldiers of the 1st and 27th Regiments, it is with a feeling of pride and satisfaction to me today that I was associated with so many noble and brave men, and who were subsequently complimented by Jeff Davis, then President of the Confederate States of America, in person, who said that every member of our regiment was fit to be a captain. His very words. I mention Captain W.C. Flournoy, of Company K, the Martin Guards, Captain Ledbetter of the Rutherford Rifles, Captains Kelly and Steele of the Rock City Guards, and Captain Adkisson of the Williamson Greys, and Captain Fulker, and other names of brave and heroic men, some of whom live today. But many have crossed the dark river and are resting under the shade of the trees on the other shore, waiting and watching for us who are left to do justice to their memory and our cause. And when we old rebels have accomplished God's purpose on earth, we too will be called to give an account of our battles, struggles, and triumphs. Reader mine, I fear that I have wearied you with too long a description of the Battle of Dead Angle. If so, please pardon me, as this is but a sample of the others which will now follow each other in rapid succession. And furthermore, in stating the above facts, the half has not been told, but it will give you a faint idea of the hard battles and privations and hardships of the soldiers in that stormy epoch, who died grandly, gloriously, nobly, dyeing the soil of old Mother Earth and enriching the same with their crimson life's blood, while doing what? Only trying to protect their homes and families, their property, their constitution, and their laws that had been guaranteed to them as a heritage forever by their forefathers. They died for the faith that each state was a separate sovereign government, as laid down by the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of our fathers. Battle of New Hope Church. We were on a forced march along a dusty road. I never in my whole life saw more dust. The dust fairly popped under our feet like tramping in a snowdrift, and our eyes and noses and mouths were filled with the dust that arose from our footsteps, and to make matters worse, the boys all tried to kick up a bigger dust. Cavalry and artillery could not be seen at 10 paces, being perfectly enveloped in dust. It was a perfect fog of dust. We were marching along, it then being nearly dark, when we heard the hoarse boom of a cannon in our rear. It sounded as though it had a bad attack of croup. It went croup, croup, croup. The order was given to about-face, double-quick march. We double-quicked back to the old church on the roadside when the 1st Tennessee Cavalry, commanded by Colonel Lewis, and the 9th Battalion, commanded by Major James H. Aiken, passed us and charged the advance of the Federal forces. We were supporting the cavalry. We heard them open. Deadly missiles were flying in every direction. The peculiar thud of spent balls and balls with shucks tied to their tails were passing over our heads. We were expecting that the cavalry would soon break, and that we would be ordered into action. But the news came from the front that the cavalry were not only holding their position, but were driving the enemy. The earth jarred and trembled. The fire fiend seemed unchained. Wounded men were coming from the front. I asked the litter corps, "Who have you there?" And one answered, "Captain Asa G. Freeman." I asked if he was dangerously wounded, and he simply said, "Shot through both thighs," and passed on. About this time we heard the whoops and cheers of the cavalry and knew that the Yankees were whipped and falling back. We marched forward and occupied the place held by the cavalry. The trees looked as if they had been cut down for new ground, being mutilated and shivered by musket and cannon balls. Horses were writhing in their death agony, and the sickling odor of battle filled the air. Well, well, those who go to battle may expect to die, and halo ever surrounds the soldier's life, because he is ever willing to die for his country. Battle of Dallas. Breckinridge charges the heights. We are ordered to march to Dallas. Reader, somehow the name and character of General John C. Breckinridge charms me. That morning he looked grand and glorious. His infantry, artillery, and cavalry were drawn up in line of battle in our immediate front. He passed along the line, and stopping about the center of the column, said, "Soldiers, we have been selected to go forward and capture yon heights. Do you think we can take them? I will lead the attack." The men whooped, and the cry, we can, was heard from one end of the line to the other. Then, "Forward, guide, center, march," were words repeated by colonels and captains. They debouched through the woods and passed out of sight in a little ravine, when we saw them emerge in an open field and advance right upon the Federal breastworks. It was the grandest spectacle I ever witnessed. We could see the smoke and dust of battle, and hear the shout of the charge and the roar and rattle of cannon and musketry. But Breckinridge's division continued to press forward without wavering or hesitating. We can see the line of dead and wounded along the track over which he passed, and finally we can see our battle flag planted upon the Federal breastworks. I cannot describe the scene. If you, reader, are an old soldier, you can appreciate my failure to give a pen picture of battle. But Breckinridge could not long hold his position. Why we were not ordered forward to follow up his success, I do not know. But remember, reader, I am not writing history. I only try to describe events as I witnessed them. We marched back to the old church on the roadside, called New Hope Church, and fortified, occupying the battlefield of the day before. The stench and sickening odor of dead men and horses were terrible. We had to breathe the putrid atmosphere. The next day, Colonel W. M. Voorhees' 48th Tennessee Regiment took position on our right. Now, here were all the Murray County boys got together at New Hope Church. I ate dinner with Captain Joe Love, and Frank Frierson filled my haversack with hardtack and bacon. Battle of Zion Church, July 4th, 1864. The 4th day of July, 12 months before, Pemberton had surrendered 25,000 soldiers, 200 pieces of artillery, and other munitions of war in proportion at Vicksburg. The Yankees wanted to celebrate the day. They thought it was their lucky day. But old Joe thought he had as much right to celebrate the Sabbath day of American independence as the Yankees had, and we celebrated it. About dawn, continued boom of cannon reverberated over the hills as if firing a 4th of July salute. I was standing on top of our works, leveling them off with a spade. A sharpshooter fired at me, but the ball missed me and shot William A. Graham through the heart. He was as noble and as brave a soldier as ever drew the breath of life, and lacked but a few votes of being elected captain of Company H at the reorganization. He was smoking his pipe when he was shot. We started to carry him down to the rear, but he remarked, "Boys, it is useless. Please lay me down and let me die." I have never in my life seen anyone meet death more philosophically. He was dead in a moment. General A.J. Vaughn, commanding General Preston Smith's brigade, had his foot shot off by a cannonball a few minutes afterwards. It seemed that both Confederate and Federal armies were celebrating the 4th of July. I cannot now remember a more severe artillery duel. 200 cannon were roaring and belching like blue blazes. It was but a battle of cannonade all day long. It seemed as though the Confederate and Federal cannons were talking to each other. Sometimes a ball passing over would seem to be mad. Then again some would seem to be laughing. Some would be mild, some sad, some gay, some sorrowful, some rollicking and jolly. And then again some would scream like the ghosts of the dead. In fact, they gave forth every kind of sound that you can imagine. It reminded one of when two storms meet in mid-ocean. The mountain billows of waters coming from two directions lash against the vessel's side, while the elements are filled with roaring, thundering, and lightning. You can almost feel the earth roll and rock like a drunken man, or a ship when she rides the billows in an awful storm. It seemed that the earth was frequently moved from its foundations, and you could hear it grate as it moved. But all through that storm of battle every soldier stood firm, for we knew that old Joe was at the helm. Kingston. Here General Johnson issued his first battle order, that thus far he had gone and intended to go no further. His line of battle was formed. His skirmish line was engaged. The artillery was booming from the rebel lines. Both sides were now face to face. There were no earthworks on either side. It was to be an open field and a fair fight. When, "Fall back!" What's the matter? I do not know how we got the news, but here is what is told us, and so it was every position we ever took. When we fell back, the news would be, "Hood's line is being enfiladed, and they are decimating his men, and he can't hold his position." But we fell back and took a position at Cassville. Cassville. Our line of battle was formed at Cassville. I never saw our troops happier or more certain of its success. A sort of grand halo illumined every soldier's face. You could see self-confidence in the features of every private soldier. We were confident of victory and success. It was like going to a frolic or a wedding. Joy was welling up in every heart. We were going to whip and rout the Yankees. It seemed to be anything else than a fight. The soldiers were jubilant. Gladness was depicted on every countenance. I honestly believe that had a battle been fought at this place, every soldier would have distinguished himself. I believe a sort of fanaticism had entered their souls, that whoever was killed would at once be carried to the seventh heaven. I am sure of one thing, that every soldier had faith enough in old Joe to have charged Sherman's whole army. When, "Halt! Retreat!" What is the matter? General Hood says they are enfilading his line and are decimating his men, and he can't hold his position. The same old story repeats itself. Old Joe's army is ever face to face with Sherman's incendiaries. We have faith in old Joe's ability to meet Sherman whenever he dares to attack. The soldiers draw their regular rations. Every time a blue coat comes in sight, there is a dead Yankee to bury. Sherman is getting cautious, his army hacked. Thus we continue to fall back for 4 months, day by day, for 110 days, fighting every day and night. On the banks of the Chattahoochee. Our army had crossed the Chattahoochee. The Federal army was on the other side. Our pickets on the south side, the Yankees on the north side. By a tacit agreement, as had ever been the custom, there was no firing across the stream. That was considered the boundary. It mattered not how large or small the stream, pickets rarely fired at each other. We would stand on each bank and laugh and talk and brag across the stream. One day, while standing on the banks of the Chattahoochee, a Yankee called out, "Johnny, oh Johnny, oh Johnny Reb." Johnny answered, "What do you want?" "You are whipped, aren't you?" "No, the man who says that is a liar, a scoundrel, and a coward." "Well, anyhow, Joe Johnson is relieved of the command." "What?" "General Joseph E. Johnson is relieved." "What is that you say?" "General Joseph E. Johnson is relieved, and Hood appointed in his place." "You are a liar, and if you will come out and show yourself, I will shoot you down in your tracks, you lying Yankee galoot." "That's more than I will stand. If the others will hands off, I will fight a duel with you. Now show your manhood." Well, reader, every word of this is true, as is everything in this book. Both men loaded their guns and stepped out to their plates. They were both to load and fire at will until one or both were killed. They took their positions without either trying to get the advantage of the other. Then someone gave the command to "Fire at will, commence firing." They fired 7 shots each. At the 7th shot, poor Johnny Reb fell a corpse, pierced through the heart. Removal of General Joseph E. Johnson. Such was the fact. General Joseph E. Johnson had been removed, and General J.B. Hood appointed to take command. Generals Hardee and Kirby Smith, 2 old veterans who had been identified with the Army of Tennessee from the beginning, resigned. We had received the intelligence from the Yankees. The relief guard confirmed the report. All the way from Rocky Face Ridge to Atlanta was a battle of 100 days. Yet Hood's line was all the time enfiladed and his men decimated, and he could not hold his position. Old Joe Johnson had taken command of the Army of Tennessee when it was crushed and broken, at a time when no other man on earth could have united it. He found it in rags and tatters, hungry and heartbroken, the morale of the men gone, their manhood vanished to the winds, their pride a thing of the past. Through his instrumentality and skillful manipulation, all these had been restored. We had been under his command nearly 12 months. He was more popular with his troops day by day. We had made a long and arduous campaign, lasting 4 months. There was not a single day in that 4 months that did not find us engaged in battle with the enemy. History does not record a single instance of where one of his lines was ever broken, not a single rout. He had not lost a single piece of artillery. He had dealt the enemy heavy blows. He was whipping them day by day, yet keeping his own men intact. His men were as in good spirits and as sure of victory at the end of 4 months as they were at the beginning. Instead of the army being depleted, it had grown in strength. 'Tis true he had fallen back, but it was to give his enemy the heavier blows. He brought all the powers of his army into play, ever on the defensive, 'tis true, yet ever striking his enemy in his most vulnerable part. His face was always to the foe. They could make no movement in which they were not anticipated. Such a man was Joseph E. Johnson, and such his record. Farewell, old fellow. We privates loved you because you made us love ourselves. Hardee, our old corps commander, whom we had followed for nearly 4 years, and whom we had loved and respected from the beginning, has left us. Kirby Smith has resigned and gone home. The spirit of our good and honored Leonidas Polk is in heaven, and his body lies yonder on the Kennesaw line. General Breckinridge and other generals resigned. I lay down my pen. I can write no more. My heart is too full. Reader, this is the saddest chapter I ever wrote. But now, after 20 years, I can see where General Joseph E. Johnson made many blunders in not attacking Sherman's line at some point. He was better on the defensive than the aggressive, and hence bis peccare in bello non licet. General Hood takes command. It came like a flash of lightning, staggering and blinding everyone. It was like applying a lighted match to an immense magazine. It was like the successful gambler, flushed with continual winnings, who staked his all and lost. It was like the end of the Southern Confederacy. Things that were not. It was the end. The soldier of the relief guard who brought us the news while picketing on the banks of the Chattahoochee remarked, by way of imparting gently the information, "Boys, we've fought all the war for nothing. There is nothing for us in store now." What's the matter now? General Joe Johnson is relieved, Generals Hardee and Kirby Smith has resigned, and General Hood is appointed to take command of the Army of Tennessee. My God, is that so? It is certainly a fact. Then I'll never fire another gun. Any news or letters that you wish carried home? I've quit, and am going home. Please tender my resignation to Jeff Davis as a private soldier in the C.S. Army. 5 men of that picket, there were just 5, as rapidly as they could, took off their cartridge boxes after throwing down their guns, and then their canteens and haversacks, taking out of their pockets their gun wipers, wrench, and gun stoppers, and saying they would have no more use for them things. They marched off, and it was the last we ever saw of them. In 10 minutes they were across the river, and no doubt had taken the oath of allegiance to the United States government. Such was the sentiment of the Army of Tennessee at that time. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Company Aytch by Sam R. Watkins. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Atlanta. Hood strikes. General John B. Hood had the reputation of being a fighting man, and wishing to show Jeff Davis what a bully fighter he was, lights in on the Yankees on Peachtree Creek. But that was I give a dare affair. General William B. Bates' division gained their works, but did not long hold them. Our division, now commanded by General John C. Brown, was supporting Bates' division, our regiment supporting the 154th Tennessee, which was pretty badly cut to pieces, and I remember how mad they seemed to be because they had to fall back. Hood thought that he would strike while the iron was hot, and while it could be hammered into shape, and make the Yankees believe that it was the powerful arm of old Joe that was wielding the sledge. But he was like the fellow who took a piece of iron to the shop, intending to make him an axe. After working for some time and failing, he concluded that he would make him a wedge, and failing in this, he said, "I'll make a scow." So he heats the iron red hot and drops it into the slack tub, and it went scow, bubble, bubble, scow, bust. Killing a Yankee Scout. On the night of the 20th, the Yankees were on Peachtree Creek, advancing toward Atlanta. I was a vidette that night on the outpost of the army. I could plainly hear the moving of their army, even the talking and laughing of the Federal soldiers. I was standing in an old sedge field. About midnight, everything quieted down. I was alone in the darkness, left to watch while the army slept. The pale moon was on the wane, a little yellow arc, emitting but a dim light, and the clouds were lazily passing over it, while the stars seemed trying to wink and sparkle and make night beautiful. I thought of God, of heaven, of home, and I thought of Jenny, her whom I had ever loved, and who had given me her troth and all of her maiden purity, to be my darling bride as soon as the war was over. I thought of the scenes of my childhood, my schoolboy days. I thought of the time when I left peace and home for war and privations. I had Jenny's picture in my pocket Bible, alongside of a braid of her beautiful hair, and I thought of how good, how pure, and how beautiful was the woman, who, if I lived, would share my hopes and struggles, my happiness as well as troubles, and who would be my darling bride, and happiness would ever be mine. An owl had lit on an old tree near me and began to who are you? And his mate would answer back from the lugubrious depths of the Chattahoochee swamps. A shivering owl also sat on the limb of a tree and kept up its dismal wailings, and every now and then I could hear the tingle, tingle, tingle of a cowbell in the distance, and the shrill cry of the whippoorwill. The shivering owl and whippoorwill seemed to be in a sort of talk, and the jack-o'-lanterns seemed to be playing spirits, when, hush! What is that? Listen! It might have been 2 o'clock, and I saw, or thought I saw, the dim outlines of a Yankee soldier lying on the ground not more than 10 steps from where I stood. I tried to imagine it was a stump or hallucination of the imagination. I looked at it again. The more I looked, the more it assumed the outlines of a man. Something glistens in his eyes. Am I mistaken? Tut, tut, it's nothing but a stump. You are getting demoralized. What? It seems to be getting closer. There are 2 tiny specks that shine like the eyes of a cat in the dark. Look here, thought I, you are getting nervous. Well, I can stand this doubt and agony no longer. I am going to fire at that object anyhow, let come what will. I raised my gun, placed it to my shoulder, took deliberate aim, and fired. And wow, wow! The most unearthly scream I ever heard greeted my ears. I broke and run to a tree nearby, and had just squatted behind it when zip, zip, 2 balls from our picket post struck the tree in 2 inches of my head. I hallooed to our picket not to fire, that it was me, the vidette. I went back, and says I, "Who fired those 2 shots?" 2 fellows spoke up and said that they did it. No sooner was it spoken than I was on them like a duck on a June bug. Pugnis et calcibus. We fought and fit and gouged and bit right there in that picket post. I have the marks on my face and forehead where one of them struck me with a Yankee zinc canteen filled with water. I do not know which whipped. My friends told me that I whipped both of them, and I suppose their friends told them that they had whipped me. All I know is they both run, and I was bloody from head to foot from where I had been cut in the forehead and face by the canteens. This all happened one dark night in the month of July, 1864, in the rifle pit in front of Atlanta. When day broke the next morning, I went forward to where I had shot at the boogaboo of the night before, and right there I found a dead Yankee soldier, fully accoutred for any emergency, his eyes wide open. I looked at him and I said, "Old fellow, I am sorry for you. Didn't know it was you, or I would have been worse scared than I was. You are dressed mighty fine, old fellow, but I don't want anything you have got but your haversack." It was a nice haversack, made of chamois skin. I kept it until the end of the war, and when we surrendered at Greensboro, North Carolina, I had it on. But the other soldiers who were with me went through him and found $12 in greenback, a piece of tobacco, a gun wiper and gun stopper and wrench, a looking glass and pocket comb, and various and sundry other articles. I came across that dead Yankee 2 days afterwards, and he was as naked as the day he came into the world, and was as black as a negro, and was as big as a skinned horse. He had mortified. I recollect of saying, "Ugh, ugh," and of my hat being lifted off my head by my hair, which stood up like the quills of the fretful porcupine. He scared me worse when dead than when living. An old citizen. But after the little unpleasant episode in the rifle pit, I went back and took my stand. When nearly day, I saw the bright and beautiful star in the east rise above the tree-tops, and the gray fog from off the river began to rise, and every now and then could hear a far-off chicken crow. While I was looking toward the Yankee line, I saw a man riding leisurely along on horseback and singing a sort of humdrum tune. I took him to be some old citizen. He rode on down the road toward me, and when he had approached, "Who goes there?" he immediately answered, "A friend." I thought that I recognized the voice in the darkness, and said I, "Who are you?" He spoke up and gave me his name. Then said I, "Advance, friend, but you are my prisoner." He rode on toward me, and I soon saw that it was Mr. Mumford Smith, the old sheriff of Murray County. I was very glad to see him, and as soon as the relief guard came, I went back to camp with him. I do not remember of ever in my life being more glad to see any person. He had brought a letter from home for my father, and some Confederate old issue bonds, which I was mighty glad to get, and also a letter from the gal I left behind me, enclosing a rosebud and 2 apple blossoms, resting on an arbor vitae leaf, and this on a little piece of white paper, and on this was written a motto, which I will have to tell for the young folks: "Receive me such as I am. Would that I were of more use for your sake. Jenny." Now that was the bouquet part. I would not like to tell you what was in that letter, but I read that letter over 500 times, and remember it today. I think I can repeat the poetry verbatim et literatim, and will do so, gentle reader, if you don't laugh at me. I'm married now, and only write from memory, and never in my life have I read it in a book or paper, and only in that letter. I love you, oh how dearly, words too faintly but express. This heart beats too sincerely, e'er in life to love you less. No, my fancy never ranges, hopes like mine can never soar. If the love I cherish changes, 'twill only be to love you more. Now, fair and gentle reader, this was the poetry, and you see for yourself that there was no shenanigan in that letter. And if a fellow went back on that sort of a letter, he would strike his mammy. And then the letter wound up with, "May God shield and protect you, and prepare you for whatever is in store for you, is the sincere prayer of Jenny." You may be sure that I felt good and happy indeed. My friends. Reader mine, in writing these rapid and imperfect recollections, I find that should I attempt to write up all the details, that I would not only weary you, but that these memoirs would soon become monotonous and uninteresting. I have written only of what I saw. Many little acts of kindness shown me by ladies and old citizens I have omitted. I remember going to an old citizen's house, and he and the old lady were making clay pipes. I recollect how they would mold the pipes and put them in a red-hot oven to burn hard. Their kindness to me will never be forgotten. The first time that I went there, they seemed very glad to see me, and told me that I looked exactly like their son who was in the army. I asked them what regiment he belonged to. After a moment's silence, the old lady, her voice trembling as she spoke, said the 14th Georgia, and then she began to cry. Then the old man said, "Yes, we have a son in the army. He went to Virginia the first year of the war, and we have never heard of him since. These wars are terrible, sir. The last time that we heard of him, he went with Stonewall Jackson away up in the mountains of West Virginia toward Romney, and I did hear that while standing picket at a little place called Hampshire Crossing, on a little stream called St. John's Run, he and 11 others froze to death. We have never heard of him since." He got up and began walking up and down the room, his hands crossed behind his back. I buckled on my knapsack to go back to camp, and I shook hands with the two good old people, and they told me good-bye, and both said, "God bless you, God bless you." I said the same to them, and said, "I pray God to reward you and bring your son safe home again." When I got back to camp, I found cannon and caissons moving, and I knew and felt that General Hood was going to strike the enemy again. Preparations were going on, but everything seemed to be out of order and system. Men were cursing and seemed to be dissatisfied and unhappy, but the army was moving. A body without limbs, an army without cavalry. Forrest's cavalry had been sent to Mississippi. Wheeler's cavalry had been sent to North Carolina and East Tennessee. Hood had sent off both of his arms, for cavalry was always called the most powerful arm of the service. The infantry were the feet, and the artillery the body. The Hood himself had no legs and but one arm, and that one in a sling. The most terrible and disastrous blow that the South ever received was when Honorable Jefferson Davis placed General Hood in command of the Army of Tennessee. I saw, I will say, thousands of men cry like babies. Regular old-fashioned boo-hoo, boo-hoo, boo-hoo. Now Hood sent off all his cavalry right in the face of a powerful army, by order and at the suggestion of Jeff Davis, and was using his cannon as feelers. Oh God, ye gods, I get sick at heart even at this late day when I think of it. I remember the morning that General Wheeler's cavalry filed by our brigade, and of their telling us, "Goodbye, boys, goodbye, boys." The 1st Tennessee Cavalry and 9th Battalion were both made up in Murray County. I saw John J. Stevenson, my friend and stepbrother, and David F. Watkins, my own dear brother, and Arch Lipscomb, Joe Fusel, Captain Kintzer, Jack Gordon, George Martin, Major Dobbins, Colonel Lewis, Captain Galloway, Aaron and Sims Latta, Major J. H. Aiken, S. H. Armstrong, Albert Dobbins, Alec Dobbins, Jim Cochran, Rafe Grisham, Captain Jim Polk, and many others with whom I was acquainted. They all said, "Goodbye, Sam, goodbye, Sam." I cried. I remember stopping the whole command and begging them to please not leave us, that if they did, Atlanta and perhaps Hood's whole army would surrender in a few days. But they told me, as near as I can now remember, "We regret to leave you, but we have to obey orders." The most ignorant private in the whole army saw everything that we had been fighting for 4 years just scattered like chaff to the winds. All the generals resigned, and those who did not resign were promoted. Colonels were made brigadier generals, captains were made colonels, and the private soldier, well, he deserted, don't you see? The private soldiers of the Army of Tennessee looked upon Hood as an overrated general, but Jeff Davis did not. Battle of July 22nd, 1864. Cannonballs at long range were falling into the city of Atlanta. Details of citizens put out the fires as they would occur from the burning shells. We could see the smoke rise and hear the shells pass away over our heads as they went on toward the doomed city. One morning Cheatham's corps marched out and through the city, we knew not whither, but we soon learned that we were going to make a flank movement. After marching 4 or 5 miles, we about-faced and marched back to within 200 yards of the place from whence we started. It was a flank movement, you see, and had to be counted that way anyhow. Well, now, as we had made the flank movement, we had to storm and take the Federal lines, because we had made a flank movement, you see. When one army makes a flank movement, it is courtesy on the part of the other army to recognize the flank movement and to change his base. Why, sir, if you don't recognize a flank movement, you ain't a graduate of West Point. Hood was a graduate of West Point, and so was Sherman. But unfortunately, there was Mynheer Dutchman commanding. McPherson had gone to dinner, the corps that had been flanked, and he couldn't speak English worth a cent. He no doubt had on board mein lager beer, so gut as wat ever was. I Schweitzer, mein Gott, you bet. Bang, bang, bang goes our skirmish line, advancing to the attack. Hans, wat wurst dat shooting mit mein left wing? Is dat the rebels, Hans? The attack. The plan of battle, as conceived and put into action by General Claiborne, was one of the boldest conceptions and at the same time one of the most hazardous that ever occurred in our army during the war. But it only required nerve and pluck to carry it out, and General Cleburne was equal to the occasion. The Yankees had fortified on 2 ranges of hills, leaving a gap in their breastworks in the valley entirely unfortified and unprotected. They felt that they could enfilade the valley between the 2 lines so that no troop would or could attack at this weak point. This valley was covered with a dense undergrowth of trees and bushes. General Walker of Georgia was ordered to attack on the extreme right, which he did nobly and gallantly, giving his life for his country while leading his men, charging their breastworks. He was killed on the very top of their works. In the meantime, General Cleburne's division was marching by the right flank in solid column, the same as if they were marching along the road, right up this valley, and thus passing between the Yankee lines and cutting them in 2, when the command by the left flank was given, which would throw them into line of battle. By this maneuver, Cleburne's men were right upon their flank and enfilading their lines, while they were expecting an attack in their front. It was the finest piece of generalship and the most successful of the war. General Mynheer Dutchman says, "Hans, mein Gott, where is General Macpherson, eh? Mein Gott, I shust believe dat der Rebel is coming. Hans, go catch der Filly Colt. Now, Hans, I wants to see wetter der Filly Colt mit stand fire. You get on der Filly Colt, and I will get behind der house, and when you shust come galloping by, I will say, 'Boo!' and if der Filly Colt don't shump, then I will know dat der Filly Colt mit stand fire." Hans says, "Pap, being as how you have to ride her in the battle, you get on her, and let me say boo." Well, General Mynheer gets on the colt, and Hans gets behind the house, and as the general comes galloping by, Hans has got an umbrella, and on seeing his father approach, suddenly opens the umbrella, and hallooing at the top of his voice, "Boo! Boo! Boo!" the filly makes a sudden jump, and kerflop comes down Mynheer. He jumps up and says, "Hans, I always knowed dat you was a fool. You make too big a boo. Why, you says boo loud enough to scare der old horse. Hans, go prig out der old horse. Der Tom Rebel will be here before Macpherson gets packed from der dinner time. I shust believe dat der Rebel ist flanking, and them tomfool colonels of mine is not got sense enough to know when General Hood is flanking. Hans, bring out der old horse. I want to find whether Macpherson is got packed from der dinner time or not." We were supporting General Cleburne's division. Our division, Cheatham's, was commanded by General John C. Brown. Cleburne's division advanced to the attack. I was marching by the side of a soldier by the name of James Galbraith, and a conscript from the Mount Pleasant country. I never heard a man pray and go on so before in my life. It actually made me feel sorry for the poor fellow. Every time that our line would stop for a few minutes, he would get down on his knees and clasp his hands and commence praying. He kept saying, "Oh, my poor wife and children. God have mercy on my poor wife and children. God pity me and have mercy on my soul." Says I, "Galbraith, why are you making a fool of yourself that way for? If you're going to be killed, why, you're as ready now as you ever will be, and you're making everybody feel bad. Quit that nonsense." He quit, but kept mumbling to himself, "God have mercy, God have mercy." Cleburne had reached the Yankee breastworks. The firing had been and was then terrific. The earth jarred and shook and trembled at the shock of battle as the 2 armies met. "Charge, men!" and I saw the Confederate flag side by side with the Federal flag. A courier dashed up and said, "General Cleburne has captured their works. Advance and attack upon his immediate left. Attention! Forward!" A discharge of cannon and a ball tore through our ranks. I heard Galbraith yell out, "Oh, God, have mercy on my poor soul!" The ball had cut his body nearly in 2. Poor fellow, he had gone to his reward. We advanced to the attack on Cleburne's immediate left. Cleburne himself was leading us in person so that we would not fire upon his men, who were then inside the Yankee line. His sword was drawn. I heard him say, "Follow me, boys." He ran forward, and amid the blazing fires of the Yankee guns was soon on top of the enemy's works. He had on a bobtail Confederate coat which looked as if it had been cut out of a scrimp pattern. You see, I remember the little things. We were but a few paces behind, following close upon him, and soon had captured their line of works. We were firing at the flying foe, astraddle of their lines of battle. This would naturally throw us in front, and Cleburne's corps supporting us. The Yankee line seemed routed. We followed in hot pursuit. But from their main line of entrenchment, which was diagonal to those that we had just captured, and also on which they had built forts and erected batteries, was their artillery, raking us fore and aft. We passed over a hill and down into a valley, being under the muzzles of this rampart of death. We had been charging and running, and had stopped to catch our breath right under their reserve and main line of battle, when General George Maney said, "Soldiers, you are ordered to go forward and charge that battery. When you start upon the charge, I want you to go, as it were, upon the wings of the wind. Shoot down and bayonet the cannoneers, and take their guns at all hazards." Old Pat Claiborne thought he had better put in a word to his soldiers. He says, "You hear what General Maney says, boys. If they don't take it, by the eternal God, you've got to take it." I heard the Irishman of the Bloody Tenth, and a darn good regiment, bejabbers, speak up and say, "Faith, General, we'll take up a collection and buy you a battery, bejasus." About this time our regiment had reformed and had got their breath, and the order was given to charge and take their guns, even at the point of the bayonet. We rushed forward up the steep hillsides, the seething fires from 10,000 muskets at small arms, and 40 pieces of cannon hurled right into our very faces, scorching and burning our clothes and hands and faces from their rapid discharges, and piling the ground with our dead and wounded almost in heaps. It seemed that the hot flames of hell were turned loose in all their fury, while the demons of damnation were laughing in their flames like seething serpents hissing out their rage. We gave one long, loud cheer and commenced the charge. As we approached their lines like a mighty inundation of the river Acheron in the infernal regions, Confederate and Federal meet. Officers with drawn swords meet officers with drawn swords, and man to man meets man to man with bayonets and loaded guns. The continued roar of battle sounded like unbottled thunder. Blood covered the ground, and the dense smoke filled our eyes and ears and faces. The groans of the wounded and dying rose above the thunder of battle. But being heavily supported by Claiborne's division and by General L.E. Polk's brigade, headed and led by General Claiborne in person, and followed by the 1st and 27th up the blazing crest, the Federal lines waver and break and fly, leaving us in possession of their breastworks and the battlefield, and I do not know how many pieces of artillery, prisoners, and small arms. Here is where Major Allen, Lieutenant Joe Carney, Captain Joe Carthel, and many other good and brave spirits gave their lives for the cause of their country. They lie today weltering in their own life's blood. It was one of the bloody battles that characterized that stormy epoch, and it was the 22nd of July, and one of the hottest days I ever felt. General George Maney led us in the heat of battle, and no general of the war acted with more gallantry and bravery during the whole war than did General George Maney on this occasion. The victory was complete. Large quantities of provisions and army stores were captured. The Federals had abandoned their entire line of breastworks and had changed their base. They were fortifying upon our left, about 5 miles off from their original position. The battlefield was covered with their dead and wounded soldiers. I have never seen so many battle flags left indiscriminately upon any battlefield. I ran over 20 in the charge and could have picked them up everywhere. Did pick up one and was promoted to 4th corporal for gallantry in picking up a flag on the battlefield. On the final charge that was made, I was shot in the ankle and heel of my foot. I crawled into their abandoned ditch, which then seemed full and running over with our wounded soldiers. I dodged behind the embankment to get out of the raking fire that was ripping through the bushes and tearing up the ground. Here I felt safe. The firing raged in front. We could hear the shout of the charge and the clash of battle. While I was sitting there, a cannonball came tearing down the works, cutting a soldier's head off, splattering his brains all over my face and bosom, and mangling and tearing 4 or 5 others to shreds. As a wounded horse was being led off, a cannonball struck him, and he was literally ripped open, falling in the very place I had just moved from. I saw an ambulance coming from toward the Yankee line at full gallop, saw them stop at a certain place, hastily put a dead man in the ambulance, and galloped back toward the Yankee lines. I did not know the meaning of this maneuver until after the battle, when I learned it was General McPherson's dead body. We had lost many a good and noble soldier. The casualties on our side were frightful. Generals, colonels, captains, lieutenants, sergeants, corporals, and privates were piled indiscriminately everywhere. Cannon, caissons, and dead horses were piled pell-mell. It was the picture of a real battlefield. Blood had gathered in pools, and in some instances had made streams of blood. 'Twas a picture of carnage and death. Am promoted. "Why, hello, Corporal. Where did you get those 2 yellow stripes from on your arm?" "Why, sir, I have been promoted for gallantry on the battlefield by picking up an orphan flag that had been run over by 1,000 fellows, and when I picked it up I did so because I thought it was pretty, and I wanted to have me a shirt made out of it." "I could have picked up 40 had I known that," said Sloan. "So could I, but I knew that the stragglers would pick them up." Reader mine, the above dialogue is true in every particular. As long as I was in action, fighting for my country, there was no chance for promotion. But as soon as I fell out of ranks and picked up a forsaken and deserted flag, I was promoted for it. I felt sort of cheap when complimented for gallantry and the high honor of 4th Corporal was conferred upon me. I felt that those brave and noble fellows who had kept on in the charge were more entitled to the honor than I was, for when the ball struck me on the ankle and heel, I did not go any further. And had I only known that picking up flags entitled me to promotion, and that every flag picked up would raise me 1 notch higher, I would have quit fighting and gone to picking up flags, and by that means I would have soon been President of the Confederate States of America. But honors now began to cluster around my brow. This is the laurel and ivy that is entwined around the noble brows of victorious and renowned generals. I honestly earned the exalted honor of 4th Corporal by picking up a Yankee battle flag on the 22nd day of July at Atlanta. 28th of July at Atlanta. Another battle was fought by Generals Stephen D. Lee and Stewart's corps on the 28th day of July. I was not in it, neither was our corps, but from what I afterwards learned, the Yankees got the best of the engagement. But our troops continued fortifying Atlanta. No other battles were ever fought at this place. I visit Montgomery. Our wounded were being sent back to Montgomery. My name was put on the wounded list. We were placed in a boxcar and whirling down to West Point, where we changed cars for Montgomery. The cars drew up at the depot in Montgomery, and we were directed to go to the hospital. When we got off the cars, little huckster stands were everywhere: apples, oranges, peaches, watermelons, everything. I know that I never saw a greater display of eatables in my whole life. I was particularly attracted toward an old lady's stand. She had bread, fish, and hard-boiled eggs. The eggs were what I was hungry for. Says I, "Madam, how do you sell your eggs?" "2 for $1, she said. "How much is your fish worth?" "A piece of bread and a piece of fish for $1. "Well, madam, put out your fish and eggs." The fish were hot and done to a crisp, actually frying in my mouth, crackling and singing as I bit off a bite. It was good, I tell you. The eggs were a little over half done. I soon demolished both, and it was only an appetizer. I invested a couple of dollars more and thought that maybe I could make it out till supper time. As I turned around, a smiling, one-legged man asked me if I wouldn't like to have a drink. Now, if there was anything that I wanted at that time, it was a drink. "How do you sell it?" says I. $1 a drink," said he. "Pour me out a drink." It was a tin cap box. I thought that I knew the old fellow, and he kept looking at me as if he knew me. Finally he said to me, "It seems that I ought to know you." I told him that I reckoned he did, as I had been there. "Ain't your name Sam?" said he. "That is what my mother called me." Well, after shaking hands, it suddenly flashed upon me who the old fellow was. I knew him well. He told me that he belonged to Captain Ed O'Neill's company, 2nd Tennessee Regiment, General William B. Bates' corps, and that his leg had been shot off at the first Battle of Manassas, and at that time he was selling cheap whiskey and tobacco for a living at Montgomery, Alabama. I tossed off a capful and paid him $1. It staggered me, and I said, "That is raw whiskey." "Yes," said he, "all my cooked whiskey is out." "If this is not quite cooked, it is as hot as fire anyhow, and burns like red-hot lava, and the whole dose seems to have gotten lodged in my windpipe." I might have tasted it, but I don't think that I did. All I can remember now is a dim recollection of a nasty, greasy, burning something going down my throat and chest, and smelling, as I remember it this day, like a decoction of red pepper tea flavored with coal oil, turpentine, and tobacco juice. The hospital. I went to the hospital that evening, saw it, and was satisfied with hospital life. I did not wish to be called a hospital rat. I had no idea of taking stock and making my headquarters at this place. Everything seemed clean and nice enough, but the smell, ye gods! I stayed there for supper. The bill of fare was a thin slice of light bread and a plate of soup, already dished out and placed at every plate. I ate it, but it only made me hungry. At 9 o'clock I had to go to bed, and all the lights were put out. Every man had a little bunk to himself. I do not know whether I slept or not, but I have a dim recollection of sawing gourds, and jumping up several times to keep some poor wretch from strangling. He was only snoring. I heard rats filing away at night, and thought that burglars were trying to get in. My dreams were not pleasant, if I went to sleep at all. I had not slept off the ground or in a house in 3 years. It was something new to me, and I could not sleep, for the room was so dark that had I got up I could not have found my way out. I laid there, I do not know how long, but I heard a rooster crow, and a dim twilight began to glimmer in the room, and even footsteps were audible in the rooms below. I got sleepy then, and went off in a doze. I had a beautiful dreamed that I was in heaven, or rather that a pair of stairs with richly carved balusters and wings, and golden steps overlaid with silk and golden-colored carpeting, came down from heaven to my room, and 2 beautiful damsels kept peeping and laughing and making faces at me from the first platform of these steps, and every now and then they would bring out their golden harps and sing me a sweet and happy song. Others were constantly passing, but always going the same way. They looked like so many schoolgirls, all dressed in shining garments. 2 or 3 times the 2 beautiful girls would go up the stairs and return, bringing fruits and vegetables that shined like pure gold. I knew that I never had seen 2 more beautiful beings on earth. The steps began to lengthen out and seemed to be all around me. They seemed to shine a halo of glory all about. The 2 ladies came closer and closer, passing around, having a beautiful wreath of flowers in each hand, and gracefully throwing them backward and forward as they laughed and danced around me. Finally one stopped and knelt down over me and whispered something in my ear. I threw up my arms to clasp the beautiful vision to my bosom, when I felt my arm grabbed, and, "Damn ye, I wish you would keep your damn arm off my wound. Ye hurt me," came from the soldier in the next bunk. The sun was shining full in my face. I got up and went down to breakfast. The bill of fare was much better for breakfast than it had been for supper. In fact, it was what is called a Jarvis breakfast. After breakfast, I took a ramble around the city. It was a nice place, and merchandise and other business was being carried on as if there were no war. Hotels were doing a thriving business. Steamboats were at the wharf, whistling and playing their calliopes. I remember the one I heard was playing Away Down on the Swanee River. To me it seemed that everyone was smiling and happy and prosperous. The Capitol. I went to the Capitol, and it is a fine building overlooking the city. When I got there, I acted just like everybody that ever visited a fine building. They wanted to go on top and look at the landscape. That is what they all say. Now, I always wanted to go on top, but I never yet thought of landscape. What I always wanted to see was how far I could look, and that is about all that any of them wants. It's mighty nice to go up on a high place with your sweetheart and hear her say, "Law, ain't it beautiful? Now, please don't go there." And how you walk up pretty close to the edge and spit over to show what a brave man you are. It's bully, I tell you. Well, I wanted to go to the top of the Capitol. I went. Wanted to go up in the cupola. Now, there was an iron ladder running up across an empty space, and you could see 200 feet below from this cupola or dome on top. The ladder was about 10 feet long, spanning the dome. It was very easy to go up because I was looking up all the time, and I was soon on top of the building. I saw how far I could see, and saw the Alabama River winding and turning until it seemed no larger than a silver thread. Well, I am very poor at describing and going into ecstasies over fancies. I want some abler pen to describe the scene. I was not thinking about the scene or the landscape. I was thinking about how I was going to get down that ladder again. I would come to that iron ladder and peep over and think if I fell how far I would have to fall. The more I thought about going down that ladder, the more I didn't feel like going down. Well, I felt that I had rather die than go down that ladder. I'm honest in this. I felt like jumping off and committing suicide rather than go down that ladder. I crossed right over the frightful chasm, but when forbearance ceased to be a virtue, I tremblingly put my foot on the first rung, then grabbed the top of the two projections. There I remained. I don't know how long, but after a while I reached down with one foot and touched the next rung. After getting that foot firmly placed, I ventured to risk the other foot. It was thus for several backward steps, until I come to see down, way down, down, down below me, and my head got giddy. The world seemed to be turning round and round. A fellow at the bottom hallooed, look up, mister, look up." I was not a foot from the upper floor. As soon as I looked at the floor, everything got steady. I kept my eyes fixed on the top of the building and soon made the landing on terra firma. I have never liked high places since. I never could bear to go upstairs in a house. I went to the Capitol at Nashville last winter, and McAndrews wanted me to go up in the cupola with him. He went and paid $25 for the privilege. I stayed, and, well, if I could estimate its value by dollars, I would say $250 million is what I made by staying down. Am arrested. The next day, while the ferry boat was crossing the river, I asked the ferryman to let me ride over. I was halted by a soldier who knowed his business. "Your pass, sir." "Well, I have no pass." "Well, sir, I will have to arrest you and take you before the provost marshal." "Very well, sir, I will go with you to the provost or anywhere else." I appear before the provost marshal. "What command do you belong to, sir?" "Well, sir, I belong to Company Aytch, 1st Tennessee Regiment. I am a wounded man sent to the hospital." "Well, sir, that's too thin. Why did you not get a pass?" "I did not think one was required." "Give me your name, sir." I gave my name. "Sergeant, take this name to the hospital and ask if such a name is registered on their books." I told him that I knew it was not. The sergeant returns and reports no such name, when he remarks, "You have to go to the guardhouse." Says I, "Colonel," I knew his rank was that of captain, "if you send me to the guardhouse, you will do me a great wrong. Here is where I was wounded." I pulled off my shoe and began to unbandage. "Well, sir, I don't want to look at your foot, and I have no patience with you. Take him to the guardhouse." Turning back, I said, "Sir, aye, you are clothed with a little brief authority, and appear to be presuming pretty heavy on that authority. But, sir, well, I have forgotten what I did say." The sergeant took me by the arm and said, Come, sir, I have my orders." As I was going up the street, I met Captain Dave Buckner and told him all the circumstances of my arrest as briefly as I could. He said, "Sergeant, bring him back with me to the provost marshal's office." They were as mad as wet hens. Their faces were burning, and I could see their jugular veins go thump, thump, thump. I do not know what Captain Buckner said to them. All I heard were the words, "otherwise insulted me." But I was liberated and was glad of it. Those girls. I then went back to the river and gave a fellow $2 to row me over the ferry. I was in no particular hurry and limped along at my leisure until about nightfall, when I came to a nice, cozy-looking farmhouse and asked to stay there all night. I was made very welcome indeed. There were two very pretty girls there, and I could have loved either 'twere t'other dear charmer away. But I fell in love with both of them, and thereby overdid the thing. This was by a dim firelight. The next day was Sunday, and we all went to church in the country. We went in an old rockaway carriage. I remember that the preacher used the words, "Oh, God," 19 times in his prayer. I had made up my mind which one of the girls I would marry. Now don't get mad, fair reader mine. I was all gallantry and smiles, and when we arrived at home, I jumped out and took hold the hand of my fair charmer to help her out. She put her foot out, and, well, I came very near telling she tramped on a cat. The cat squalled. The Talisman.
But then you know, reader, that I was engaged to Jenny, and I had a talisman in my pocket Bible in the way of a love letter, against the charms of other beautiful and interesting young ladies. Uncle Jimmy Reeves had been to Murray County, and on returning to Atlanta found out that I was wounded and in the hospital at Montgomery, and brought the letter to me. And as I am married now, I don't mind telling you what was in the letter, if you won't laugh at me. You see, Jenny was my sweetheart, and here is my sweetheart's letter. My dear Sam, I write to tell you that I love you yet, and you alone, and day by day I love you more, and pray every night and morning for your safe return home again. My greatest grief is that we heard you were wounded and in the hospital, and I cannot be with you to nurse you. We heard of the death of many noble and brave men in Atlanta, and the death of Captain Carthel, Cousin Mary's husband. It was sent by Captain January. He belonged to the 12th Tennessee, of which Colonel Watkins was lieutenant colonel. The weather is very beautiful here, and the flowers in the garden are in full bloom, and the apples are getting ripe. I have gathered a small bouquet, which I will put in the letter. I also send by Uncle Jimmy a tobacco bag and a watch guard made out of horsehair, and a woolen hood knit with my own hands, with love and best respects. We heard that you had captured a flag at Atlanta and was promoted for it to corporal. Is that some high office? I know you will be a general yet, because I always hear of your being in every battle, and always the foremost man in the attack. Sam, please take care of yourself for my sake, and don't let the Yankees kill you. Well, good-bye, darling. I will ever pray for God's richest and choicest blessings upon you. Be sure and write a long, long letter, I don't care how long, to your loving and sincere Jenny.
The Brave Captain. When I got back to the Alabama River, opposite Montgomery, the ferry boat was on the other shore. A steamboat had just pulled out of its moorings and crossed over to where I was and began to take on wood. I went on board and told the captain, who was a clever and good man, that I would like to take a trip with him to Mobile and back, and that I was a wounded soldier from the hospital. He told me, "All right, come along, and I will foot expenses." It was about sunset, but along the line of the distant horizon we could see the dark and heavy clouds begin to boil up in thick and ominous columns. The lightning was darting to and fro like lurid sheets of fire, and the storm seemed to be gathering. We could hear the Storm King and his chariot in the clouds, rumbling as he came, but a dead lull was seen and felt in the air and in nature. Everything was in a holy hush, except the hoarse belchings of the engines, the sizzling and frying of the boilers, and the work of the machinery on the lower deck. At last the storm burst upon us in all its fury. It was a tornado, and the women and children began to scream and pray, the mate to curse and swear. I was standing by the captain on the main upper deck, as he was trying to direct the pilot how to steer the boat through that awful storm, when we heard the alarm bell ring out and the hoarse cry of "Fire! Fire! Fire!" Men were running toward the fire with buckets, and the hose began throwing water on the flames. Men, women, and children were jumping in the water, and the captain used every effort to quiet the panic and to land his boat with its passengers, but the storm and fire were too much, and down the vessel sank to rise no more. Many had been saved in the lifeboat, and many were drowned. I jumped overboard, and the last thing I saw was the noble and brave captain still ringing the bell as the vessel went down. He went down amid the flames to fill a watery grave. The water was full of struggling and dying people for miles. I did not go to Mobile. How I Get Back to Atlanta. When I got to Montgomery, the car said toot toot and raised the hue and cry and followed in pursuit. Kind friends, I fear that I have wearied you with my visit to Montgomery, but I am going back to camp now, and will not leave it again until our banner is furled, never to be again unfurled. I, you remember, was without a pass, and did not wish to be carried a second time before that good, brave, and just provost marshal, and something told me not to go to the hospital. I found out when the cars would leave, and thought that I would get on them and go back without any trouble. I got on the cars, but was hustled off mighty quick because I had no pass.
A train of boxcars was about leaving for West Point, and I took a seat on top of one of them and was again hustled off, but I had determined to go, and as the engine began to puff and tug and pull, I slipped in between two boxcars, sitting on one part of one and putting my feet on the other, and rode this way until I got to West Point. The conductor discovered me and had put me off several times before I got to West Point, but I would jump on again as soon as the car started. When I got to West Point, a train of cars started off, and I ran, trying to get on, when Captain Peebles reached out his hand and pulled me in, and I arrived safe and sound at Atlanta. On my way back to Atlanta, I got with Dow Aiken and Billy March. Billy March had been shot through the underjaw by a minie-ball at the Octagon House, but by proper attention and nursing he had recovered. Connor Aiken was killed at the Octagon House and Dow wounded. When we got back to the regiment, then stationed near a fine concrete house where Shepard and I would sleep every night, nearly right on our works, we found two 30-pound Parrott guns stationed in our immediate front and throwing shells away over our heads into the city of Atlanta. We had just begun to tell all the boys howdy when I saw Dow Aiken fall. A fragment of shell had struck him on his backbone, and he was carried back wounded and bleeding. We could see the smoke boil up, and it would be nearly a minute before we could hear the report of the cannon, and then a few moments after we would hear the scream of the shell as it went on to Atlanta. We used to count from the time we would see the smoke boil up until we would hear the noise, and some fellow would call out, "Look out, boys, the United States is sending iron over into the Southern Confederacy. Let's send a little lead back to the United States." And we would blaze away with our Enfield and Whitworth guns, and every time we would fire, we would silence those Parrott guns. This kind of fun was carried on for 46 days. Death of Tom Tuck's Rooster. Atlanta was a great place to fight chickens. I had heard much said about cockpits and cockfights, but had never seen such a thing. Away over the hill, outside of the range of Thomas's 30-pound Parrott guns with which he was trying to burn up Atlanta, the boys had fixed up a cockpit. It was fixed exactly like a circus ring, and seats and benches were arranged for the spectators. Well, I went to the cockfight one day. A great many roosters were to be pitted that day, and each one was trimmed and gaffed. A gaff is a long, keen piece of steel, as sharp as a needle, that is fitted over the spurs. Well, I looked on at the fun. Tom Tuck's rooster was named Southern Confederacy, but this was abbreviated to Confed, and as the pet name they called him Fed. Well, Fed was a trained rooster and would clean up a Bigfoot rooster as soon as he was put in the pit. But Tom always gave Fed every advantage. One day a green-looking country hunk came in with a rooster that he wanted to pit against Fed. He looked like a common rail splitter. The money was soon made up and the stakes placed in proper hands. The gaffs were fitted, the roosters were placed in the pit and held until both were sufficiently mad to fight, when they were turned loose and each struck at the same time. I looked, and poor Fed was dead. The other rooster had popped both gaffs through his head. He was a dead rooster, yea, a dead cock in the pit. Tom went and picked up his rooster and said, "Poor Fed, I loved you. You used to crow every morning at daylight to wake me up. I have carried you a long time, but alas, alas, poor Fed, your days are numbered, and those who fight will sometimes be slain. Now, friends, conscripts, countrymen, if you have any tears to shed, prepare to shed them now. I will not bury Fed. The evils that roosters do live after them, but the good is oft interred with their bones. So let it not be with Confed. Confed left no will, but I will pick him and fry him and dip my biscuit in his gravy. Poor Fed, Confed, Confederacy, I place one hand on my heart and one on my head, regretting that I have not another to place on my stomach, and whisper, softly whisper, in the most doleful accents, goodbye, farewell, a long farewell." Not a laugh was heard, not even a joke, as the dead rooster and the camp kettle they hurried, for Tom had lost $10 and was broke, in the cockpit where Confed was buried. They cooked him slowly in the middle of the day, as the frying pan they were solemnly turning. the hungry fellows looking at him as he lay, with one side raw, the other burning. Some surplus feathers covered his breast, not in a shroud, but in a tiara they soused him. He lay like a picked chicken, taking his rest, while the rebel boys danced and cursed around him. Not a few or short were the cuss words they said, yet they spoke many words of sorrow, as they steadfastly gazed on the face of the dead, and thought, "What'll we do for chicken tomorrow?" Lightly they'll talk of the Southern Confed that's gone, and o'er his empty carcass upbraid him, but nothing he'll reck if they'll let him sleep on in the place where they have laid him. Sadly and slowly they laid him down, from the field of fame, fresh and gory. They ate off his flesh and threw away his bones, and then left them alone in their glory. When cut, slash, bang, da bang, and here comes a dash of Yankee cavalry right in the midst of camp under whip and spur, yelling like a band of wild Comanches and bearing right down on the few mourners around the dead body of Confed. After making this bold dash, they about faced and were soon out of sight. There was no harm done, but alas, that cooked chicken was gone. Poor Confed, to what a sad end you have come. Just to think that but a few short hours ago you was a proud rooster, was cock of the walk, and was considered invincible. But alas, you have sunk so low as to become food for Federals. Requiescat in pace, you can crow no more. Old Joe Brown's Pets. By way of grim jest and a fitting burlesque to tragic scenes, or rather to the thing called glorious war, old Joe Brown, then governor of Georgia, sent in his militia. It was the richest picture of an army I ever saw. It beat Forepaw's double-ring circus. Everyone was dressed in citizens' clothes, and the very best they had at that time. A few had double-barreled shotguns, but the majority had umbrellas and walking sticks, and nearly everyone had on a duster, a flat-bosomed biled shirt, and a plug hat. To make the thing more ridiculous, the dwarf and the giant were marching side by side, the knock-kneed by the side of the bow-legged, the driven-in by the side of the drawn-out, the pale and sallow dyspeptic who looked like Alex Stevens and who seemed to have been taken out of a chimney that smoked very badly, and whose diet was goobers and sweet potatoes, was placed beside the 300-pounder, who was dressed up to kill, and whose looks seemed to say, "I've got a substitute in the army and 20 Negroes at home besides. Hum, hum." Now that is the sort of army that old Joe Brown had when he seceded from the Southern Confederacy, declaring that each state was a separate sovereign government of itself, and as old Joe Brown was an original secessionist, he wanted to exemplify the grand principles of secession that had been advocated by Patrick Henry, John Randolph of Roanoke, and John C. Calhoun, in all of whom he was a firm believer. I will say, however, in all due deference to the Georgia militia and old Joe Brown's pets, that there was many a gallant and noble fellow among them. I remember on one occasion that I was detailed to report to a captain of the 4th Tennessee Regiment, Colonel Farquharson, called Guidepost. I have forgotten that captain's name. He was a small-sized man with a large, long set of black whiskers. He was the captain, and I was the corporal of the detail. We were ordered to take a company of the Georgia militia on a scout. We went around to our extreme right wing, passing through Terry's Mill Pond and over the old battlefield of the 22nd, and past the place where General Walker fell, when we came across 2 ladies. One of them kept going from one tree to another and saying, "This pine tree, that pine tree, this pine tree, that pine tree." In answer to our inquiry, they informed us that the young woman's husband was killed on the 22nd and had been buried under a pine tree, and she was nearly crazy because she could not find his dead body. We passed on, and as soon as we came in sight of the old line of Yankee breastworks, an unexpected volley of Minnie balls was fired into our ranks, killing this captain of the 4th Tennessee Regiment, and killing and wounding 7 or 8 of the Georgia militia. I hallooed to lay down as soon as possible, and a perfect whiz of Minnie balls passed over, when I immediately gave the command of "Attention! Forward! Charge and capture that squad!" That Georgia militia, every man of them, charged forward, and in a few moments we ran into a small squad of Yankees and captured the whole layout. We then carried back to camp the dead captain and the killed and wounded militia. I had seen a great many men killed and wounded, but somehow or other those dead and wounded men of that day made a more serious impression on my mind than in any previous or subsequent battles. They were buried with all the honors of war, and I never will forget the incidents and scenes of this day as long as I live. We go after Stoneman. One morning our regiment was ordered to march double quick to the depot to take the cars for somewhere. The engine was under steam and ready to start for that mysterious somewhere. The whistle blew long and loud, and away we went at breakneck speed for an hour, and drew up at a little place by the name of Jonesboro. The Yankees had captured the town and were tearing up the railroad track. A regiment of rebel infantry and a brigade of cavalry were already in line of battle in their rear. We jumped out of the cars and advanced to attack them in front. Our line had just begun to open a pretty brisk fire on the Yankee cavalry when they broke, running right through and over the lines of the regiment of infantry and brigade of cavalry in their rear, the men opening ranks to get out of the way of the hoofs of their horses. It was Stoneman's cavalry, upon its celebrated raid toward Macon and Andersonville to liberate the Federal prisoners. We went to work like beavers, and in a few hours the railroad track had been repaired so that we could pass. Every few miles we would find the track torn up, but we would get out of the cars, fix up the track, and light out again. We were charging a brigade of cavalry with a train of cars, as it were. They would try to stop our progress by tearing up the track, but we were crowding them a little too strong. At last they thought it was time to quit that foolishness, and then commenced a race between cavalry and cars for Macon, Georgia. The cars had to run exceedingly slow and careful, fearing a tear-up or ambuscade, but at last Macon came in sight. 25,000 or 30,000 Federal prisoners were confined at this place, and it was poorly guarded and protected. We feared that Stoneman would only march in, overpower the guards, and liberate the prisoners, and we would have some tall fighting to do. But on arriving at Macon, we found that Stoneman and all of his command had just surrendered to a brigade of cavalry and the Georgia militia, and we helped march the gentlemen inside the prison walls at Macon. They had furnished their own transportation, paying their own way and bearing their own expenses, and instead of liberating any prisoners, were themselves imprisoned. An extra detail was made as guard from our regiment to take them on to Andersonville, but I was not on this detail, so I remained until the detail returned. Macon is a beautiful place. Business was flourishing like a green bay tree. The people were good, kind, and clever to us. Everywhere the hospitality of their homes was proffered us. We were regarded as their liberators. They gave us all the good things they had, eating, drinking, etc. We felt our consequence, I assure you, reader. We felt we were heroes indeed. But the benzine and other fluids became a little promiscuous, and the libations of the boys a little too heavy. They began to get boisterous, I might say riotous. Some of the boys got to behaving badly, and would go into stores and places, and did many things they ought not to have done. In fact, the whole caboodle of them ought to have been carried to the guardhouse. They were whooping and yelling and firing off their guns just for the fun of the thing. I remember of going into a very nice family's house, and the old lady told the dog to go out, sir, and remarked rather to herself, go out, I wish you were killed anyhow. John says, Madam, do you want that dog killed? Sure enough. She says, yes, I do wish that he was dead. Before I could even think or catch my breath, bang went John's gun, and the dog was weltering in his blood right on the good lady's floor, the top of his head entirely torn off. I confess, reader, that I came very near jumping out of my skin, as it were, at the unexpected discharge of the gun. And other such scenes, I reckon, were being enacted elsewhere, but at last a detail was sent around to arrest all stragglers, and we were soon rolling back to Atlanta. Bellum letale. Well, after jugging Stoneman, we go back to Atlanta and occupy our same old place near the concrete house. We found everything exactly as we had left it, with the exception of the increased number of graybacks, which seemed to have propagated the thousandfold since we left, and they were crawling about like ants, making little paths and tracks in the dirt as they wiggled and waddled about, hunting for ye old rebel soldier. Sherman's 2 30-pound Parrott guns were in the same position, and every now and then a lazy-looking shell would pass over, speeding its way on to Atlanta. The old citizens had dug little cellars, which the soldiers called gopher holes, and the women and children were crowded together in these cellars, while Sherman was trying to burn the city over their heads. But as I am not writing history, I refer you to any history of the war for Sherman's war record in and around Atlanta. As John and I started to go back, we thought we would visit the hospital. Great God, I get sick today when I think of the agony and suffering and sickening stench and odor of dead and dying, of wounds and sloughing sores caused by the deadly gangrene, of the groaning and wailing. I cannot describe it. I remember I went in the rear of the building, and there I saw a pile of arms and legs, rotting and decomposing. And although I saw thousands of horrifying scenes during the war, yet today I have no recollection in my whole life of ever seeing anything that I remember with more horror than that pile of legs and arms that had been cut off our soldiers. As John and I went through the hospital and were looking at the poor suffering fellows, I heard a weak voice calling, "Sam! Oh, Sam!" I went to the poor fellow, but did not recognize him at first, but soon found out that it was James Galbraith, the poor fellow who had been shot nearly in two on the 22nd of July. I tried to be cheerful and say, "Hello, Galbraith, old fellow. I thought you were in heaven long before this." He laughed a sort of dry, cracking laugh and asked me to hand him a drink of water. I handed it to him. He then began to mumble and tell me something in a rambling and incoherent way, but all I could catch was for me to write to his family, who were living near Mount Pleasant. I asked him if he was badly wounded. He only pulled down the blanket, that was all. I get sick when I think of it. The lower part of his body was hanging to the upper part by a shred, and all of his entrails were lying on the cot with him, the bile and other excrements exuding from them, and they full of maggots. I replaced the blanket as tenderly as I could, and then said, "Galbraith, good-bye." I then kissed him on his lips and forehead and left. As I passed on, he kept trying to tell me something, but I could not make out what he said, and fearing I would cause him to exert himself too much, I left. It was the only field hospital that I saw during the whole war, and I have no desire to see another. Those hollow-eyed and sunken-cheeked sufferers, shot in every conceivable part of their body, some shrieking and calling upon their mothers, some laughing the hard, cackling laugh of the sufferer without hope, and some cursing like troopers, and some writhing and groaning as their wounds were being bandaged and dressed. I saw a man of the 27th who had lost his right hand, another his leg, and another whose head was laid open, and I could see his brain thump, and another with his under jaw shot off. In fact, wounded in every manner possible. Ah, reader, there is no glory for the private soldier, much less a conscript. James Galbraith was a conscript, as was also Fayne King. Mr. King was killed at Chickamauga. He and Galbraith were conscripted and joined Company Aytch at the same time. Both were old men and very poor, with large families at home, and they were forced to go to war against their wishes, while their wives and little children were at home without the necessities of life. The officers have all the glory. Glory is not for the private soldier, such as die in the hospitals, being eat up with the deadly gangrene, and being imperfectly waited on. Glory is for generals, colonels, majors, captains, and lieutenants. They have all the glory. And when the poor private wins battles by dint of sweat, hard marches, camp and picket duty, fasting and broken bones, the officers get the glory. The private's pay was $11 per month, if he got it. The general's pay was $300 per month, and he always got his. I am not complaining. These things happened 16 to 20 years ago. Men who never fired a gun, nor killed a Yankee during the whole war, are today the heroes of the war. Now I tell you what I think about it. I think that those of us who fought as private soldiers fought as much for glory as the general did, and those of us who stuck it out to the last deserve more praise than the general who resigned because some other general was placed in command over him. A general could resign. That was honorable. A private could not resign or choose his branch of service, and if he deserted, it was death. The Scout and Death of a Yankee Lieutenant. General Hood had sent off all his cavalry, and a detail was made each day of so many men for a scout to find out all we could about the movements of the Yankees. Colonel George Porter of the 6th Tennessee was in command of the detail. We passed through Atlanta and went down the railroad for several miles, and then made a flank movement toward where we expected to come in contact with the Yankees. When we came to a skirt of woods, we were deployed as skirmishers. Colonel Porter ordered us to reprime our guns and to advance at 25 paces apart, being deployed as skirmishers, and to keep under cover as much as possible. He need not have told us this, because we had not learned war for nothing. We would run from one tree to another, and then make a careful reconnoiter before proceeding to another. We had begun to get a little careless, when bang, 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 it seemed that we had got into a Yankee ambush. The firing seemed to be from all sides, and was rattling among the leaves and bushes. It appeared as if some supernatural infernal battle was going on, and the air was full of smoke. We had not seen the Yankees. I ran to a tree to my right, and just as I got to it, I saw my comrade sink to the ground, clutching at the air as he fell dead. I kept trying to see the Yankees so that I might shoot. I had been looking 100 yards ahead, when, happening to look not more than 10 paces from me, I saw a big 6-foot Yankee with a black feather in his hat aiming deliberately at me. I dropped to the ground, and at the same moment heard the report, and my hat was knocked off in the bushes. I remained perfectly still, and in a few minutes I saw a young Yankee lieutenant peering through the bushes. I would rather not have killed him, but I was afraid to fire and afraid to run, and yet I did not wish to kill him. He was as pretty as a woman, and somehow I thought I had met him before. Our eyes met. He stood like a statue. He gazed at me with a kind of scared expression. I still did not want to kill him, and am sorry today that I did, for I believe I could have captured him. But I fired, and saw the blood spurt all over his face. He was the prettiest youth I ever saw. When I fired, the Yankees broke and run, and I went up to the boy I had killed, and the blood was gushing out of his mouth. I was sorry. Atlanta forsaken. One morning, about the break of day, our artillery opened along our breastworks, scaring us almost to death, for it was the first guns that had been fired for more than a month. We sprang to our feet and grabbed our muskets and ran out and asked someone what did that mean. We were informed that they were feeling for the Yankees. The comment that was made by the private soldier was simply 2 words, and those 2 words were, "Oh, shucks." The Yankees had gone, no one knew whither, and our batteries were shelling the woods, feeling for them. Oh, shucks. "Hello," says Hood. "Whar in the dickens and Tom Walker are them Yanks, hey? Feel for them with long-range feelers." A boom, boom. "Can anybody tell me where them Yanks are? Send out a few more feelers. The feelers in the shape of cannonballs will bring them to taw." Boom, boom, boom. For the want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For the want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For the want of a horse, the general was lost. For the want of a general, the battle was lost. Forrest's cavalry had been sent off somewhere. Wheeler's cavalry had been sent away yonder in the rear of the enemy to tear up the railroad and cut off their supplies, etc., and we had to find out the movements of the enemy by feeling for them, by shelling the vacant woods. The Yankees were at that time 25 miles in our rear, 100,000 strong, at a place called Jonesboro. I don't know how it was found out that they were at Jonesboro, but anyhow the news had come, and Cheatham's corps had to go and see about it. Stewart's corps must hold Atlanta, and Stephen D. Lee's corps must be stretched at proper distance so that the word could be passed backward and forward as to how they were getting along. As yet, it is impossible to tell of the movements of the enemy, because our cannonballs had not come back and reported any movements to us. We had always heard that the cannonballs were blind, and we did not suppose that they could see to find their way back. Well, our corps made a forced march for a day and a night, and passed the word back that we had seen some signs of the Yankees being in that vicinity, and thought perhaps a small portion, about 100,000, were nigh about there somewhere. Says he, "It's a strange thing you don't know. Send out your feelers." We sent out a few feelers, and they report back very promptly that the Yankees are here sure enough, or that is what our feelers say. Pass the word up the line. The word is passed from mouth to mouth of Lee's skirmish line 25 miles back to Atlanta. Well, if that be the case, we will set fire to all of our army stores, spike all our cannon, and play smash generally and forsake Atlanta. In the meantime, just hold on where you are till Stuart gets through his job of blowing up arsenals, burning up the army stores, and spiking the cannon, and we will send our Negro boy Caesar down to the horse lot to see if he can't catch old Dance. But she is such a fool with that young suckling colt of hers that it takes him almost all day to catch her, and if the drawbars happen to be down, she'll get in the clover patch, and I don't think he will catch her today. But if he don't catch her, I'll ride Balaam anyhow. He's got a mighty sore back and needs a shoe put on his left hind foot, and he cut his ankle with a broken shoe on his forefoot and has not been fed today. However, I will be along by and by. Stuart, do you think you will be able to get through with your job of blowing up by day after tomorrow, or by Saturday at 12 o'clock? Lee, pass the word down to Cheatham and ask him what he thinks the Yankees are doing. Now, Kinloch, get my duster and umbrella and bring out Balaam. Now, reader, that was the impression made on the private's mind at that time. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Company Aytch by Sam R. Watkins. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jonesboro. The Battle of Jonesboro. Stuart's corps was at Atlanta. Lee's corps was between Atlanta and Jonesboro, and Cheatham's corps, then numbering not more than 5,000 men, because the woods and roads were full of straggling soldiers who were not in the fight, was face to face with a whole Yankee army, and he was compelled to flee, fight, or surrender. This was the position and condition of the Grand Army of Tennessee on this memorable occasion. If I am not mistaken, General Cleburne was commanding Cheatham's corps at that time. We expected to be ordered into action every moment, and kept seesawing backward and forward until I did not know which way the Yankees were or which way the rebels. We would form line of battle, charge bayonets, and would raise a whoop and yell, expecting to be dashed right against the Yankee lines, and then the order would be given to retreat. Then we would immediately reform and be ordered to charge again a mile off at another place. Then we would march and countermarch backward and forward over the same ground, passing through Jonesboro away over the hill, and then back through the town. First 4 forward and back, your right hand to your left hand, lady, swing half round and balance all. This sort of movement is called a feint. A feint is what is called in poker a bluff, or what is called in bully a brag. A feint means anything but a fight. If a lady faints, she is either scared or in love and wants to fall in her lover's arms. If an army makes a feint movement, it is trying to hide some other movement. Hello, Lee, what does Cleburne say the Yankees are doing at Jonesboro? They are fanning themselves. Well, keep up that feint movement until all the boys faint from sheer exhaustion. Hello, Stuart. Do you think you will be able to burn up those 10 locomotives and destroy those 100 carloads of provisions by day after tomorrow? Lee, ask Cleburne if he feels fainty. Ask him how a fellow feels when he feigns. Cleburne says, I have feigned, feigned, and feigned until I can't feign any longer. Well, says Hood, if you can't feint any longer, you had better flee, fight, or faint. Balaam gets along mighty slow, but I'll be thar after a while. At 1 o'clock we were ordered to the attack. We had to pass through an Osage orange hedge that was worse than the enemy's fire. Their breastworks were before us. We yelled and charged and hurrahed and said, Boo, boo, we're coming, coming, look out, don't you see us coming? Why don't you let us hear the cannon's opening roar? Why don't you rattle a few old muskets over there at us? Boo, boo, we are coming. Tag. We have done got to your breastworks. Now we tagged first. Why don't you tag back? A Yankee seems to be lying on the other side of the breastwork sunning himself, and raising himself on his elbow says, Fool who with your fatty bread? We are too old birds to be caught with that kind of chaff. We don't want any of that kind of pie. What you got there would make a mouthful. Bring on your pudding and pound cake, and then we will talk to you." General Granberry, who, poor fellow, was killed in the butchery at Franklin afterwards, goes up to the breastworks and says, "Look here, Yank, we're fighting, sure enough." Mein Herr Dutchman comes out and says, "Ish dat so? Well, I just been von little pit hungry dish morning, und I just gobble you up for mein lunch before dinner time. Dat ish der kind of mons what I bees." Now, reader, that is a fine description of this memorable battle. That's it. No more, no less. I was in it all, and saw General Granbury captured. We did our level best to get up a fight, but it was no go any way we could fix it up. I mean, no disrespect to General Hood. He was a noble, brave, and good man, and we loved him for his many virtues and goodness of heart. I do not propose to criticize his generalship or ability as a commander. I only write of the impression and sentiment that were made upon the private's mind at the time, and as I remember them now. But Atlanta had fallen into the hands of the Yankees, and they were satisfied for the time. Death of Lieutenant John Whittaker. At this place we built small breastworks, but for what purpose I never knew. The Yankees seemed determined not to fight, no way we could fix it. Every now and then they would send over a feeler to see how we were getting along. Sometimes these feelers would do some damage. I remember one morning we were way over a hill, and every now and then here would come one of those lazy-looking feelers, just bouncing along as if he were in no hurry, called in military ricochet. They were very easy to dodge if you could see them in time. Well, one morning, as before remarked, Lieutenant John Whittaker, then in command of Company Aytch, and myself were sitting down eating breakfast out of the same tin plate. We were sopping gravy out with some cold cornbread, when Captain W.C. Flournoy of the Martin Guards hallooed out, "Look out, Sam! Look! Look!" I just turned my head, and in turning, the cannonball knocked my hat off, and striking Lieutenant Whittaker full in the side of the head, carried away the whole of his skull part, leaving only the face. His brains fell in the plate from which we were sopping, and his head fell in my lap, deluging my face and clothes with his blood. Poor fellow, he never knew what hurt him. His spirit went to its God that morning. Green Reeves carried the poor boy off on his shoulder, and after wrapping him up in a blanket, buried him. His bones are at Jonesboro today. The cannonball did not go 20 yards after accomplishing its work of death. Captain Flournoy laughed at me and said, "Sam, that came very near getting you. 1/10 of an inch more would have cooked your goose." I saw another man try to stop one of those balls that was just rolling along on the ground. He put his foot out to stop the ball, but the ball did not stop, but instead carried the man's leg off with it. He no doubt today walks on a cork leg and is tax collector of the county in which he lives. I saw a thoughtless boy trying to catch one in his hands as it bounced along. He caught it, but the next moment his spirit had gone to meet its God. But poor John, we all loved him. He died for his country. His soul is with his God. He gave his all for the country he loved, and may he rest in peace under the shade of the tree where he is buried, and may the birds sing their sweetest songs, the flowers put forth their most beautiful blooms, while the gentle breezes play about the brave boy's grave. Green Reeves was the only person at the funeral. No tears of a loving mother or gentle sister were there. Green interred his body, and there it will remain till the resurrection. John Whittaker deserves more than a passing notice. He was noble and brave, and when he was killed, Company Aytch was without an officer then commanding. Every single officer had been killed, wounded, or captured. John served as a private soldier the first year of the war, and at the reorganization at Corinth, Mississippi, he, W.J. Whitthorne, and myself all ran for orderly sergeant of Company Aytch, and John was elected. And the first vacancy occurring after the death of Captain Webster, he was commissioned brevet second lieutenant. When the war broke out, John was clerking for John L. and T.S. Brandon in Columbia. He had been in every march, skirmish, and battle that had been fought during the war. Along the dusty road, on the march, in the bivouac, and on the battlefield, he was the same noble, generous boy, always kind, ever gentle, a smile ever lighting up his countenance. He was one of the most even-tempered men I ever knew. I never knew him to speak an unkind word to anyone or use a profane or vulgar word in my life. One of those ricochet cannonballs struck my old friend N.B. Shepherd. Shep was one of the bravest and best soldiers who ever shouldered a musket. It is true he was but a private soldier, but he was the best friend I had during the whole war. In intellect he was far ahead of most of the generals, and would have honored and adorned the name of general in the C.S.A. He was ever brave and true. He followed our cause to the end, yet all the time an invalid. Today he is languishing on a bed of pain and sickness caused by that ball at Jonesboro. The ball struck him on his knapsack, knocking him 20 feet and breaking 1 or 2 ribs and dislocating his shoulder. He was one of God's noblemen indeed, none braver, none more generous. God alone controls our destinies, and surely he who watched over us and took care of us in those dark and bloody days will not forsake us now. God alone fits and prepares for us the things that are in store for us. There is none so wise as to foresee the future or foretell the end. God sometimes seems afar off, but he will never leave or forsake anyone who puts his trust in him. The day will come when the good as well as evil will all meet on one broad platform to be rewarded for the deeds done in the body, when time shall end, with the gates of eternity closed, and the key fastened to the girdle of God forever. Pardon me, reader, I have wandered. But when my mind reverts to those scenes and times, I seem to live in another age and time, and I sometimes think that after us comes the end of the universe. I am not trying to moralize. I'm only trying to write a few scenes and incidents that came under the observation of a poor old rebel Webfoot private soldier in those stormy days and times. Histories tell the great facts, while I only tell the minor incidents. But on this day of which I now write, we can see in plain view more than 1,000 Yankee battle flags waving on top of the red earthworks, not more than 400 yards off. Every private soldier there knew that General Hood's army was scattered all the way from Jonesboro to Atlanta, a distance of 25 miles, without any order, discipline, or spirit to do anything. We could hear General Stuart, away back yonder in Atlanta, still blowing up arsenals and smashing things generally, while Stephen D. Lee was somewhere between Lovejoy Station and Macon, scattering. And here was but a demoralized remnant of Cheatham's corps facing the whole Yankee army. I have ever thought that Sherman was a poor general, not to have captured Hood and his whole army at that time, but it matters not what I thought, as I am not trying to tell the ifs and ands, but only of what I saw. In a word, we had everything against us. The soldiers distrusted everything. They were broken down with the long days' hard marching, were almost dead with hunger and fatigue. Everyone was taking his own course and wishing and praying to be captured. Hard and senseless marching, with little sleep, half rations, and lice, had made their lives a misery. Each one prayed that all this foolishness might end one way or the other. It was too much for human endurance. Every private soldier knew that such things as this could not last. They were willing to ring down the curtain, put out the footlights, and go home. There was no hope in the future for them. Then comes the farce. From this time forward until the close of the war, everything was a farce as to generalship. The tragedy had been played. The glory of war had departed. We all loved Hood. He was such a clever fellow and a good man. "Well, Yank, why don't you come on and take us? We're ready to play quits now. We have not anything to let you have, but you can parole us, and we'll go home and be good boys, good Union boys, and we'll be sorry for the war, and we wouldn't have the Negroes in any way, shape, form, or fashion, And the American continent has no North, no South, no East, no West. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, boo-hoo." "Tut, tut, Johnny, all that sounds tolerable nice, but then you might want some favor from Uncle Sam, and the tit is too full of milk at the present time for us to turn loose. It's a sugar tit, Johnny, and just begins to taste sweet. And besides, Johnny, once or twice you have put us to a little trouble. We haven't forgotten that. And we've got you down now. Our foot is on your neck, and you must feel our boot heel. We want to stamp you a little. That's what's the matter with Hannah. And, Johnny, you have fought us hard. You are a brave boy. You are proud and aristocratic, Johnny, and we are going to crush your cursed pride and spirit. And now, Johnny, come here. I've something to whisper in your ear. Hold your ear close down here so that no one else can hear. We want big, fat offices when the war is over. Some of us want to be presidents, some governors, some go to Congress and be big ministers to Europe and all those kind of things, Johnny, you know. Just go back to your camp, Johnny. Chase round, put on a bold front, flourish your trumpets, blow your horns. And, Johnny, we don't want to be hard on you, and we'll tell you what we'll do for you. Away back in your territory, between Columbia and Nashville, is the most beautiful country and the most fertile, and we have lots of rations up there, too. Now you just go up there, Johnny, and stay until we want you. We ain't done with you yet, my boy. Oh, no, Johnny. And another thing, Johnny, you will find there between Mount Pleasant and Columbia the most beautiful country that the sun of heaven ever shone upon. And halfway between those two places is St. John's Church. Its tower is all covered with a beautiful vine of ivy, and, Johnny, you know that in olden times it was the custom to entwine a wreath of ivy around the brows of victorious generals. We have no doubt that many of your brave generals will express a wish, when they pass by, to be buried beneath the ivy vine that shades so gracefully and beautifully the wall of this grand old church. And, Johnny, you will find a land of beauty and plenty, and when you get there, just put on as much style as you like. Just pretend, for our sake, you know, that you are a bully boy with a glass eye, and that you are the victorious army that has returned to free and oppressed people. We will allow you this, Johnny, so that we will be the greater when we want you, Johnny. And now, Johnny, we did not want to tell you what we are going to say to you now, but will, so that you'll feel bad. Sherman wants to march to the sea while the world looks on and wonders. He wants to desolate the land and burn up your towns, to show what a coward he is and how dastardly, and one of our boys wants to write a piece of poetry about it. But that ain't all, Johnny. You know that you fellows have got a great deal of cotton at Augusta, Savannah, Charleston, Mobile, and other places, and cotton is worth $2 a pound in gold, and as Christmas is coming, we want to go down there for some of that cotton to make a Christmas gift to old Abe and old Chloe, don't you see? Oh, no, Johnny, we don't want to end the war just yet a while. The sugar is mighty sweet in the tit, and we want to suck a while longer. Why, sir, we want to rob and then burn every house in Georgia and South Carolina. We will get millions of dollars by robbery alone, don't you see? Palmetto. Hark from the tomb that doleful sound, my ears attend the cry. General J.B. Hood established his headquarters at Palmetto, Georgia, and here is where we were visited by His Honor, the Honorable Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America, and the Right Honorable Robert Toombs, Secretary of State under the said Davis. Now, kind reader, don't ask me to write history. I know nothing of history. See the histories for grand movements and military maneuvers. I can only tell of what I saw and how I felt. I can remember now General Robert Toombs and Honorable Jeff Davis's speeches. I remember how funny Toombs's speech was. He kept us all laughing by telling us how quick we were going to whip the Yankees and how they would skedaddle back across the Ohio River like a dog with a tin oyster can tied to his tail. Captain Joe P. Lee and I laughed till our sides hurt us. I can remember today how I felt. I felt that Davis and Toombs had come there to bring us glad tidings of great joy, and to proclaim to us that the ratification of a treaty of peace had been declared between the Confederate States of America and the United States. I remember how good and happy I felt when these two leading statesmen told of when grim-visaged war would smooth her wrinkled front, and when the dark clouds that had so long lowered over our own loved South would be in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. I do not know how others felt, but I can say never before or since did I feel so grand. I came very near saying gloomy and peculiar. I felt that I and every other soldier who had stood the storms of battle for nearly 4 long years were now about to be discharged from hard marches and scant rations and ragged clothes and standing guard, etc. In fact, the black cloud of war had indeed drifted away, and the beautiful stars that gemmed the blue ether above, smiling, said, "Peace, peace, peace." I felt bully, I tell you. I remember what I thought, that the emblem of our cause was the palmetto and the Texas star, and the town of Palmetto were symbolical of our ultimate triumph, and that we had unconsciously, nay, I should say prophetically, fallen upon Palmetto as the most appropriate place to declare peace between the two sections. I was sure Jeff Davis and Bob Toombs had come there for the purpose of receiving the capitulation of and to make terms with our conquered foes. I knew that in every battle we had fought, except Missionary Ridge, we had whipped the Yankees, and I knew that we had no cavalry and had but little artillery and only 2 corps of infantry at Missionary Ridge, and from the way Jeff and Bob talked, it was enough to make us old private soldiers feel that swelling of the heart we ne'er should feel again. I remember that other high dignitaries and big bugs, then the controlling spirits of the government at Richmond, visited us, and most of these high dignitaries shook hands with the boys. It was all hands round, swing the corner, and balance your partner. I shook hands with Honorable Jeff Davis, and he said, "Howdy, Captain." I shook hands with Toombs, and he said, "Howdy, Major." And every big bug that I shook hands with put another star on my collar and chicken guts on my sleeve. My pen is inadequate to describe the ecstasy and patriotic feeling that permeated every vein and fiber of my animated being. It was paradise regained. All the long struggles we had followed the Palmetto flag through victory and defeat, through storms and rains and snows and tempest, along the dusty roads and on the weary marches, we had been true to our country, our cause, and our people. And there was a conscious pride within us that when we would return to our homes, we would go back as conquerors, and that we would receive the plaudits of our people. "Well done, good and faithful servants. You have been true and faithful even to the end." Jeff Davis makes a speech. "Sinner, come view the ground where you shall shortly lie." I remember that Honorable Jeff Davis visited the army at this place, and our regiment, the 1st Tennessee, serenaded him. After playing several airs, he came out of General Hood's marquee and spoke substantially as follows, as near as I can remember. "Soldiers of the 1st Tennessee Regiment, I should have said captains, for every man among you is fit to be a captain. I have heard of your acts of bravery on every battlefield during the whole war, and captains, so far as my wishes are concerned, I today make every man of you a captain, and I say honestly today, were I a private soldier, I would have no higher ambition on earth than to belong to the 1st Tennessee Regiment. You have been loyal and brave. Your ranks have never yet in the whole history of the war been broken, even though the army was routed. Yet, my brave soldiers, Tennesseans all, you have ever remained in your places in the rank of the regiment, ever subject to the command of your gallant Colonel Field in every battle, march, skirmish, in an advance or a retreat. There are on the books of the War Department at Richmond the names of 250,000 deserters. Yet you, my brave soldiers, captains all, have remained true and steadfast. I have heard that some have been dissatisfied with the removal of General Joe E. Johnson and the appointment of General Hood. But my brave and gallant heroes, I say I have done what I thought best for your good. Soon we commence our march to Kentucky and Tennessee. Be of good cheer, for within a short while your faces will be turned homeward, and your feet will press Tennessee soil, and you will tread your native heath amid the blue grass regions and pastures green of your native homes. We will flank General Sherman out of Atlanta, tear up the railroad and cut off his supplies, and make Atlanta a perfect Moscow of defeat to the Federal Army. Situated as he is in an enemy's country, with his communications all cut off, and our army in the rear, he will be powerless, and being posted and cognizant of our position and of the Federal Army, this movement will be the Ultima Thule, the grand crowning stroke for our independence and the conclusion of the war. Armistice in name only. About this time, the Yankees sent us a flag of truce, asking an armistice to move every citizen of Atlanta south of their lines. it was granted. They wanted to live in fine houses a while, and then rob and burn them, and issued orders for all the citizens of Atlanta to immediately abandon the city. They wanted Atlanta for themselves, you see. For weeks and months the roads were filled with loaded wagons of old and decrepit people who had been hunted and hounded from their homes with a relentless cruelty worse, yea, much worse, than ever blackened the pages of barbaric or savage history. I remember assisting in unloading our wagons that General Hood, poor fellow, had kindly sent in to bring out the citizens of Atlanta to a little place called Rough and Ready, about halfway between Palmetto and Atlanta. Every day I would look on at the suffering of delicate ladies, old men, and mothers with little children clinging to them, crying, "Oh, Mama, Mama," and old women and tottering old men whose gray hairs should have protected them from the savage acts of Yankee hate and Puritan barbarity. And I wondered how on earth our generals, including those who had resigned, that is where the shoe pinches, could quietly look on at this dark, black, and damning insult to our people, and not use at least one effort to rescue them from such terrible and unmitigated cruelty, barbarity, and outrage. General Hood remonstrated with Sherman against the insult, saying that it transcended in studied and ingenious cruelty all acts ever before brought to my attention in the dark history of war. In the great crisis of the war, Hardee, Kirby Smith, Breckinridge, and many brigadiers resigned, thus throwing all the responsibility upon poor Hood. Author's note: in the Southern Army, the question was, who ranked? Not who was the best general, or colonel, or captain, but who ranked. The article of rank finally got down to corporals, and rank finally bursted the government. I desire to state that they left the army on account of rank. Oh, this thing of rank! Many other generals resigned and left us privates in the lurch. But the gallant Cheatham, Claiborne, Granbury, Gist, Strahl, Adams, John C. Brown, William B. Bate, Stewart, Lowry, and others stuck to us to the last. The sinews of war were strained to their utmost tension. A scout. At this place I was detailed as a regular scout, which position I continued to hold during our stay at Palmetto. It was a good thing. It beat camp guard all hollow. I had answered "Here" at roll call 10,000 times in those nearly 4 years, but I had sort of got used to the darn thing. Now, reader, I will give you a few chapters on the kind of fun I had for a while. Our instructions were simply to try and find out all we could about the Yankees and report all movements. One dark, rainy evening, while out as a scout, and after traveling all day, I was returning from the Yankee outposts at Atlanta, and had captured a Yankee prisoner, who I then had under my charge, and whom I afterwards carried and delivered to General Hood. He was a considerable muggins and a great coward, in fact, a Yankee deserter. I soon found out that there was no harm in him, as he was tired of war anyhow, and was anxious to go to prison. We went into an old log cabin near the road until the rain would be over. I was standing in the cabin door, looking at the raindrops fall off the house and make little bubbles in the drip, and listening to the pattering on the clapboard roof, when, happening to look up, not 50 yards off, I discovered a regiment of Yankee cavalry approaching. I knew it would be utterly impossible for me to get away unseen, and I did not know what to do. The Yankee prisoner was scared almost to death. I said, "Look, look!" I turned in the room and found the planks of the floor were loose. I raised 2 of them, and Yank and I slipped through. I replaced the planks and could peep out beneath the sill of the house and see the legs of the horses. They passed on and did not come into the old house. They were at least a half hour in passing. At last the main regiment had all passed, and I saw the rear guard about to pass, when I heard the captain say, "Go and look in that old house." 3 fellows detached themselves from the command and came dashing up to the old house. I thought, gone up sure, as I was afraid the Yankee prisoner would make his presence known. When the 3 men came up, they pushed open the door and looked around, and one fellow said, "Boo!" Then they rode off. But that boo! I was sure I was caught, but I was not. What is this rebel doing here?
I would go up to the Yankee outpost, and if some popinjay of a tacky officer didn't come along, we would have a good time. One morning I was sitting down to eat a good breakfast with the Yankee outpost. They were cavalry, and they were mighty clever and pleasant fellows. I looked along the road toward Atlanta, and not 50 yards from the outpost I saw a body of infantry approaching. I don't know why I didn't run. I ought to have done so, but I didn't. I stayed there until this body of infantry came up. They had come to relieve the cavalry. It was a detail of Negro soldiers headed by the meanest-looking white man as their captain I ever saw. In very abrupt words, he told the cavalry that he had come to take their place and that they were ordered to report back to their command. Happening to catch sight of me, he asked, "What is this rebel doing here?" One of the men spoke up and tried to say something in my favor, but the more he said, the more the captain of the blacks would get mad. He started toward me 2 or 3 times. He was starting, I could see by the flush of his face, to take hold of me anyhow. The cavalryman tried to protest and said a few cuss words. The captain of the blacks looks back very mad at the cavalry. Here was my opportunity, now or never. Uncle Negro looked on, not seeming to care for the cavalry captain or for me. I took up my gun very gently and cocked it. I had the gentleman. I had made up my mind if he advanced 1 step further that he was a dead man. When he turned to look again, it was a look of surprise. His face was as red as a scalded beet, but in a moment was as white as a sheet. He was afraid to turn his head to give a command. The cavalry motioned their hands at me, as much as to say, "Run, Johnny, run." The captain of the blacks fell upon his face, and I broke and ran like a quarter horse. I never saw or heard any more of the captain of the blacks or his guard afterward. Look out, boys. One night, 5 of us scouts, I thought all strangers to me, put up at an old gentleman's house. I took him for a Catholic priest. His head was shaved, and he had on a loose gown like a lady's dress, and a large cord and tassel tied around his waist, from which dangled a large bunch of keys. He treated us very kindly and hospitably, so far as words and politeness went, but we had to eat our own rations and sleep on our own blankets. At bedtime, he invited us to sleep in a shed in front of his double-log cabin. We all went in, lay down, and slept. A little while before day, the old priest came in and woke us up and said he thought he saw in the moonlight a detachment of cavalry coming down the road from toward the rebel lines. One of our party jumped up and said there was a company of cavalry coming that way, and then all 4 broke toward the old priest's room. I jumped up, put on 1 boot, and holding the other in my hand, I stepped out in the yard with my hat and coat off, both being left in the room. A Yankee captain stepped up to me and said, "Are you number 200? I answered very huskily, "No, sir, I'm not." He then went on in the house, and on looking at the fence, I saw there was at least 200 Yankee cavalry right at me. I did not know what to do. My hat, coat, gun, cartridge box, and knapsack were all in the room. I was afraid to stay there, and was afraid to give the alarm. I soon saw almost every one of the Yankees dismount, and then I determined to give the alarm and run. I hallooed out as loud as I could, "Look out, boys!" and broke and run. I had to jump over a garden picket fence, and as I lit on the other side, bang, bang, bang was fired right after me. They stayed there but a short time, and I went back and got my gun and other accoutrements. Am captured. When I left the old priest's house, it was then good day, nearly sunup, and I had started back toward our lines and had walked on for about a half a mile, not thinking of danger, when 4 Yankees jumped out in the middle of the road and said, "Halt there! Oh, yes, we've got you at last." I was in for it. What could I do? Their guns were cocked and leveled at me, and if I started to run, I would be shot. So I surrendered. In a very short time, the regiment of Yankee cavalry came up, and the first greeting I had was, "Hello, you ain't number 200, are you?" I was taken prisoner. They, I thought, seemed to be very gleeful about it, and I had to march right back by the old priest's house, and they carried me to the headquarters of General Stephen Williams. As soon as he saw me, he said, "Who have you got there, a prisoner or a deserter?" They said a prisoner. "From what command?" No one answered. Finally, he asked me what command I belonged to. I told him the Confederate States Army. Then said he, "What is your name?" Said I, "General, if that would be any information, I would have no hesitancy in giving it.
but I claim your protection as a prisoner of war. I am a private soldier in the Confederate States Army, and I don't feel authorized to answer any question you may ask." He looked at me with a kind of quizzical look and said, "That is the way with you rebels. I have never yet seen one of you, but thought what little information he might possess to be of value to the Union forces." Then one of the men spoke up and said, "I think he is a spy or a scout and does not belong to the regular army." He then gave me a close look and said, a guerrilla," and ordered me to be taken to the provost marshal's office. They carried me to a large, fine house upstairs, and I was politely requested to take a seat. I sat there some moments, when a dandy-looking clerk of a fellow came up with a book in his hand and said, "The name?" I appeared not to understand, and he said, "The name." I still looked at him, and he said, "The name." I did not know what he meant by "the name." Finally he closed the book with a slam and started off, and said I, "Did you want to find out my name?" He said, "I asked you 3 times. I said, 'When?' If you ever asked me my name, I have never heard it." But he was too mad to listen to anything else. I was carried to another room in the same building and locked up. I remained there till about dark, when a man brought me a tolerably good supper, and then left me alone to my own meditations. I could hear the sentinels at all times of the night calling out the hours. I did not sleep a wink, nor even lay down. I had made up my mind to escape if there was any possible chance. About 3 o'clock everything got perfectly still. I went to the window, and it had a heavy bolt across it, and I could not open it. I thought I would try the door, but I knew that a guard was stationed in the hall, for I could see a dim light glimmer through the keyhole. I took my knife and unscrewed the catch in which the lock was fastened, and soon found out that I could open the door, but then there was the guard standing in the main entrance downstairs. I peeped out, and he was quietly walking to and fro on his beat, every time looking to the hall. I made up my mind by his measured tread as to how often he would pass the door, and one time, after he had just passed, I came out in the hall and started to run down the steps. About midway down the steps, one of them cracked very loud, but I ran on down in the lower hall and ran into a room, the door of which was open. The sentinel came back to the entrance of the hall and listened a few minutes, and then moved on again. I went to the window and raised the sash, but the blind was fastened with a kind of patent catch. I gave 1 or 2 hard pushes and felt it move. After that I made one big lunge, and it flew wide open, but it made a noise that woke up every sentinel. I jumped out in the yard and gained the street, and on looking back I heard the alarm given, and lights began to glimmer everywhere. But seeing no one directly after me, I made tracks toward Peachtree Creek, and went on till I came to the old battlefield of July 22nd, and made my way back to our lines. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Company Aytch by Sam R. Watkins. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Advance into Tennessee. General Hood makes a flank movement. After remaining a good long time at Jonesboro, the news came that we were going to flank Atlanta. We flanked it. A flank means a go-around. Yank says, "What are you doing, Johnny?" Johnny says, "We are flanking." Yank says, "Bully for you." We passed around Atlanta, crossed the Chattahoochee, and traveled back over the same route on which we had made the arduous campaign under Joe Johnson. It took us 4 months in the first instance, and but little longer than as many days in the second to get back to Dalton, our starting point. On our way up there, the Yankee cavalry followed us to see how we were getting along with the flanking business. We had pontoons made for the purpose of crossing streams. When we would get to a stream, the pontoons would be thrown across, and Hood's army would cross. Yank would halloo over and say, "Well, Johnny, have you got everything across?" "Yes," would be the answer. "Well, we want those old pontoons, as you will not need them again," and they would take them. We passed all those glorious battlefields that have been made classic in history, frequently coming across the skull of some poor fellow sitting on top of a stump, grinning a ghastly smile. Also the bones of horses along the road, and fences burned and destroyed, and occasionally the charred remains of a once fine dwelling house. Outside of these occasional reminders, we could see no evidence of the desolation of the track of an invading army. The country looked like it did at first. Citizens came out and seemed glad to see us, and would divide their onions, garlic, and leek with us. The soldiers were in good spirits, but it was the spirit of innocence and peace, not war and victory. Where the railroads would cross a river, a blockhouse had been erected, and the bridge was guarded by a company of Federals. But we always flanked these little affairs. We wanted bigger and better meat. We capture Dalton. When we arrived at Dalton, we had a desire to see how the old place looked. Not that we cared anything about it, but we just wanted to take a last farewell look at the old place. We saw the United States flag flying from the ramparts, and thought that Yank would probably be asleep or catching lice, or maybe engaged in a game of 7-up. So we sent forward a physician with some white bandages tied to the end of a long pole. He walked up and says, "Hello, boys." "What is it, boss?" "Well, boys, we've come for you." "Hiya, hiya, hiya, he, he, if it ain't old master, show." The place was guarded by Negro troops. We marched the black rascals out. They were mighty glad to see us, and we were kindly disposed to them. We said, "Now, boys, we don't want the Yankees to get mad at you and to blame you, so let's just get out here on the railroad track and tear it up and pile up the cross ties and then pile the iron on top of them, and we'll set the thing afire, and when the Yankees come back they will say, 'What a bully fight them naggers did make.'" A Yankee always says nagger. Reader, you should have seen how that old railroad did flop over, and how the darkies did sweat, and how the perfume did fill the atmosphere. But there were some Yankee soldiers in a blockhouse at Ringgold Gap who thought they would act big. They said that Sherman had told them not to come out of that blockhouse anyhow. But General William B. Bate began to persuade the gentlemen by sending a few 4-pound parrot feelers. Ah, those feelers! They persuaded eloquently. They persuaded effectually, those feelers did. The Yankees soon surrendered. The old place looked natural-like, only it seemed to have a sort of graveyard loneliness about it. A Man in the Well. On leaving Dalton after a day's march, we had stopped for the night. Our guns were stacked, and I started off with a comrade to get some wood to cook supper with. We were walking along, he a little in the rear, when he suddenly disappeared. I could not imagine what had become of him. I looked everywhere. The earth seemed to have opened and swallowed him. I called and called, but could get no answer. Presently I heard a groan that seemed to come out of the bowels of the earth, but as yet I could not make out where he was. Going back to camp, I procured a light, and after whooping and hallooing for a long time, I heard another groan, this time much louder than before. The voice appeared to be overhead. There was no tree or house to be seen, and then again the voice seemed to answer from under the ground in a hollow, sepulchral tone. But I could not tell where he was. But I was determined to find him, so I kept on hallooing and he answering. I went to the place where the voice appeared to come out of the earth. I was walking along rather thoughtlessly and carelessly, when 1 inch more, and I would have disappeared also. Right before me I saw the long, dry grass all bending toward a common center, and I knew that it was an old well, and that my comrade had fallen in it. But how to get him out was the unsolved problem. I ran back to camp to get assistance, and everybody had a great curiosity to see the man in the well. They would get chunks of fire and shake over the well, and peeping down would say, "Well, he's in there," and go off, and others would come and talk about his being in there. The poor fellow stayed in that well all night. The next morning we got a long rope from a battery and let it down in the well, and soon had him on terra firma. He was worse scared than hurt. Tuscumbia. We arrived and remained at Tuscumbia several days, awaiting the laying of the pontoons across the Tennessee River at Florence, Alabama, and then we all crossed over. While at Tuscumbia, John Branch and I saw a nice sweet potato patch that looked very tempting to a hungry rebel. We looked all around and thought that the coast was clear. We jumped over the fence and commenced grabbing for the sweet potatoes. I had got my haversack full and had started off when we heard, "Halt there!" I looked around, and there was a soldier guard. We broke and run like quarter horses, and the guard pulled down on us just as we jumped the fence. I don't think his gun was loaded, though, because we did not hear the ball whistle. We marched from Decatur to Florence. Here the pontoon bridges were nicely and beautifully stretched across the river. We walked over this floating bridge, and soon found ourselves on the Tennessee side of Tennessee River. In driving a great herd of cattle across the pontoon, the front one got stubborn, and the others, crowding up all in one bulk, broke the line that held the pontoon and drowned many of the drove. We had beef for supper that night. En route for Columbia. And nightly we pitch our moving tent, a day's march nearer home. How every pulse did beat and leap, and how every heart did throb with emotions of joy, which seemed nearly akin to heaven when we received the glad intelligence of our onward march toward the land of promise and of our loved ones. The cold November winds coming off the mountains of the Northwest were blowing right in our faces and nearly cutting us in two. We were inured to privations and hardships, had been upon every march, in every battle, in every skirmish, in every advance, in every retreat, in every victory, in every defeat. We had laid under the burning heat of a tropical sun, had made the cold, frozen earth our bed, with no covering save the blue canopy of heaven, had braved dangers, had breasted floods, had seen our comrades slain upon our right and our left hand, had heard guns that carried death in their missiles, had heard the shouts of the charge, had seen the enemy in full retreat and flying in every direction, had heard the shrieks and groans of the wounded and dying, had seen the blood of our countrymen dyeing the earth and enriching the soil, had been hungry when there was nothing to eat, had been in rags and tatters. We had marked the frozen earth with bloody and unshod feet. We had been elated with victory and crushed by defeat, had seen and felt the pleasure of the life of a soldier, and had drank the cup to its dregs. Yes, we had seen it all, and had shared in its hopes and its fears, its love and its hate, its good and its bad, its virtue and its vice, its glories and its shame. We had followed the successes and reverses of the flag of the lost cause through all these years of blood and strife. I was simply one of hundreds of thousands in the same fix. The tale is the same that every soldier would tell, except Jim Whitler. Jim had dodged about, and had escaped being conscripted until Hood's raid, he called it. Hood's army was taking up every able-bodied man and conscripting him into the army. Jim Whitler had got a position as overseer on a large plantation, and had about 100 Negroes under his surveillance. The army had been passing a given point, and Jim was sitting quietly on the fence looking at the soldiers. The conscripting squad nabbed him. Jim tried to beg off, but all entreaty was in vain. He wanted to go by home and tell his wife and children good-bye and to get his clothes. It was no go. But after a while, Jim says, "Gentlemen, Ganny, the law." You see, Jim knowed the law. He didn't know B from a bull's foot in the spelling book, but he said, "the law." Now, when anyone says anything about the law, everyone stops to listen. Jim says, "Ganny, the law," laying great stress upon the law, "allows every man who has 20 Negroes to stay at home. Ganny." Those old soldiers had long, long ago forgotten about that old law of the long-gone past, but Jim had treasured it up in his memory, these many years, and he thought it would serve him now, as it had no doubt frequently done in the past. The conscript officer said, "Law or no law, you fall into line, take this gun and cartridge box, and march." Jim's spirits sank. His hopes vanished into air. Jim was soon in line and was tramping to the music of the march. He stayed with the company 2 days. The third day it was reported that the Yankees had taken position on the Murfreesboro pike. A regiment was sent to the attack. It was Jim's regiment. He advanced bravely into battle. The Minnie balls began to whistle around his ears. The regiment was ordered to fire.
He hadn't seen anything to shoot at, but he blazed away. He loaded and fired the second time, when they were ordered to retreat. He didn't see anything to run from, but the other soldiers began to run, and Jim run too. Jim had not learned the word halt, and just kept on running. He run, and he run, and he run, and kept on running until he got home, when he jumped in his door and shouted, "Whoopee Rhoda, I Ganny, I've served 4 years in the rebel army." End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Company Aytch by Sam R. Watkins. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Battles in Tennessee. Columbia. This is my own, my native land. Once more the Murray Greys are permitted to put their feet upon their native heath, and to revisit their homes and friends after having followed their tattered and torn and battle-riddled flag, which they had borne aloft for 4 long years on every march and in every battle that had been fought by the Army of Tennessee. We were a mere handful of devoted braves who had stood by our colors when sometimes it seemed that God himself had forsaken us. But parents, here are your noble and brave sons. And ladies, 4 years ago you gave us this flag, and we promised you that we would come back with the flag as victors, or we would come not at all. We have been true to our promise and our trust. On every battlefield, the flag that you entrusted to our hands has been borne aloft by brave and heroic men amid shot and shell, bloody battle and death. We have never forsaken our colors. Are we worthy to be called the sons of old Murray County? Or have we fought in vain? Have our efforts been appreciated? Or have 4 years of our lives been wasted while we were battling for constitutional government, the supremacy of our laws over centralization, and our rights as guaranteed to us by the blood of our forefathers on the battlefields of the Revolution? It is for you to make up your verdict. If our lives as soldiers have been a failure, we can but bow our heads on our bosoms and say, surely 4 years of our lives have been given for naught, and our efforts to please you have been in vain. Yet the invader's foot is still on our soil, but there beats in our bosoms the blood of brave and patriotic men, and we will continue to follow our old and war-worn and battle-riddled flag until it goes down forever. The Murray Greys, commanded by Captain A.M. Looney, left Columbia 4 years ago with 120 men. How many of those 120 original members are with the company today? Just 12. Company H has 20 members, but some of this number had subsequently enlisted. But we 12 will stick to our colors until she goes down forever, and until 5 more of this number fall dead and bleeding on the battlefield. A fiasco. When we arrived on the site of Columbia, we found the Yankees still in possession of the town, fortified and determined to resist our advance. We sent forward a feeler, and the feeler reports back very promptly. Yes, the Yankees are there. Well, if that be the case, we'll just make a flank movement. We turn off the main turnpike at J.E.R. Carpenter's and march through the cedars and cross Duck River at Davis's Ferry on pontoon bridges near Lowell's Mill. We pass on and cross Rutherford Creek near Burrick's Mill about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We had marched through fields in the heavy mud, and the men, weary and worn out, were just dragging themselves along, passing by the old Union Seminary and then by Mr. Fred Thompson's until we came to the Rally Hill Turnpike, it being then nearly dark. We heard some skirmishing, but exhausted as we were, we went into bivouac. The Yankees, it seems to me, might have captured the hold of us, but that is a matter of history. But I desire to state that no blunder was made by either Generals Cheatham or Stewart, neither of whom ever failed to come to time. Jeff Davis is alone responsible for the blunder. About 2 hours after sunup the next morning, we received the order to fall in, quick, make haste, hurrah, promptly, men, each rank, count 2, by the right flank, quick time, march, keep promptly closed up. Everything indicated an immediate attack. When we got to the turnpike near Spring Hill, lo and behold, wonder of wonders, the whole Yankee army had passed during the night.
The bird had flown. We made a quick and rapid march down the turnpike, finding Yankee guns and knapsacks, and now and then a broken-down straggler, also 2 pieces of howitzer cannon and at least 20 broken wagons along the road. Everything betokened a rout and a stampede of the Yankee army. Double quick! Forrest is in the rear. Now for fun. All that we want to do now is to catch the blue-coated rascals, ha-ha! We all want to see the surrender, ha-ha! Double quick! A rip, rip, rip! Woof! Pant, pant, pant! First one man drops out, and then another. The Yankees are routed and running, and Forrest has crossed Harpeth River in the rear of Franklin. Hurrah, men! Keep closed up! We are going to capture Schofield. Forrest is in the rear. Never mind the straggler and cannon. Kerflop! We come up against the breastworks at Franklin. Franklin. The death angel gathers its last harvest. Kind reader, right here my pen and courage and ability fail me. I shrink from butchery. Would to God I could tear the page from these memoirs and from my own memory. It is the blackest page in the history of the War of the Lost Cause. It was the bloodiest battle of modern times in any war. It was the finishing stroke to the independence of the Southern Confederacy. I was there. I saw it. My flesh trembles and creeps and crawls when I think of it today. My heart almost ceases to beat at the horrid recollection. Would to God that I had never witnessed such a scene. I cannot describe it. It beggars description. I will not attempt to describe it. I could not. The death angel was there to gather its last harvest. It was the grand coronation of death. Would that I could turn the page. But I feel though I did so, that page would still be there, teeming with its scenes of horror and blood. I can only tell of what I saw. Our regiment was resting in the gap of a range of hills in plain view of the city of Franklin. We could see the battle flags of the enemy waving in the breeze. Our army had been depleted of its strength by a forced march from Spring Hill, and stragglers lined the road. Our artillery had not yet come up and could not be brought into action. Our cavalry was across Harpeth River, and our army was but in poor condition to make an assault. While resting on this hillside, I saw a courier dash up to our commanding general, B.F. Cheatham, and the word "Attention" was given. I knew then that we would soon be in action. Forward, march! We passed over the hill and through a little skirt of woods. The enemy were fortified right across the Franklin Pike in the suburbs of the town. Right here in these woods a detail of skirmishers was called for. Our regiment was detailed. We deployed as skirmishers, firing as we advanced on the left of the turnpike road. If I had not been a skirmisher on that day, I would not have been writing this today in the year of our Lord 1882. It was 4 o'clock on that dark and dismal December day when the line of battle was formed, and those devoted heroes were ordered forward to strike for their altars and their fires, for the green graves of their sires, for God and their native land. As they marched on down through an open field toward the rampart of blood and death, the Federal batteries began to open, and mow down and gather into the garner of death as brave and good and pure spirits as the world ever saw. The twilight of evening had begun to gather as a precursor of the coming blackness of midnight darkness that was to envelop a scene so sickening and horrible that it is impossible for me to describe it. "Forward, men!" is repeated all along the line. A sheet of fire was poured into our very faces, and for a moment we halted as if in despair, as the terrible avalanche of shot and shell laid low those brave and gallant heroes whose bleeding wounds attested that the struggle would be desperate. "Forward, men!" The air loaded with death-dealing missiles. Never on this earth did men fight against such terrible odds. It seemed that the very elements of heaven and earth were in one mighty uproar. "Forward, men!" And the blood spurts in a perfect jet from the dead and wounded. The earth is red with blood. It runs in streams, making little rivulets as it flows. Occasionally there was a little lull in the storm of battle, as the men were loading their guns, and for a few moments it seemed as if night tried to cover the scene with her mantle. The death angel shrieks and laughs, and old Father Time is busy with his sickle as he gathers in the last harvest of death, crying, "More, more, more," while his rapacious maw is glutted with the slain. But the skirmish line being deployed out, extending a little wider than the battle did, passing through a thicket of small locusts, where Brown, orderly sergeant of Company B, was killed, we advanced on toward the breastworks, on and on. I had made up my mind to die. Felt glorious. We pressed forward until I heard the terrific roar of battle open on our right. Cleburne's division was charging their works. I passed on until I got to their works and got over on their, the Yankees' side, but in 50 yards of where I was, the scene was lit up by fires that seemed like hell itself. It appeared to be but one line of streaming fire. Our troops were upon one side of the breastworks and the Federals on the other. I ran up on the line of works where our men were engaged. Dead soldiers filled the entrenchments. The firing was kept up until after midnight, and gradually died out. We passed the night where we were. But when the morrow's sun began to light up the eastern sky with its rosy hues, and we looked over the battlefield, oh my God, what did we see? It was a grand holocaust of death. Death had held high carnival there that night. The dead were piled the one on the other all over the ground. I never was so horrified and appalled in all my life. Horses like men had died game on the gory breastworks. General Adams' horse had his 4 feet on one side of the works and his hind feet on the other, dead. The general seems to have been caught so that he was held to the horse's back, sitting almost as if living, riddled and mangled and torn with balls. General Cleburne's mare had her 4 feet on top of the works, dead in that position. General Cleburne's body was pierced with 49 bullets, through and through. General Straw's horse lay by the roadside, and the general by his side, both dead, and all his staff. General Gist, a noble and brave cavalier from South Carolina, was lying with his sword reaching across the breastwork still grasped in his hand. He was lying there dead, all dead. They sleep in the graveyard yonder at Ashwood, almost in sight of my home, where I am writing today. They sleep the sleep of the brave. We love and cherish their memory. They sleep beneath the ivy-mantled walls of St. John's Church, where they expressed a wish to be buried. The private soldier sleeps where he fell, piled in one mighty heap. 4,500 privates, all lying side by side in death. 13 generals were killed and wounded. 4,500 men slain, all piled and heaped together at one place. I cannot tell the number of others killed and wounded. God alone knows that. We'll all find out on the morning of the final resurrection. Kind friends, I have attempted in my poor and feeble way to tell you of this. I can hardly call it battle. It should be called by some other name. But like all other battles, it, too, has gone into history. I leave it with you. I do not know who was to blame. It lives in the memory of the poor old rebel soldier who went through that trying and terrible ordeal. We shed a tear for the dead. They are buried and forgotten. We meet no more on earth. But up yonder, beyond the sunset and the night, away beyond the clouds and tempest, away beyond the stars that ever twinkle and shine in the blue vault above us, away yonder by the great white throne and by the river of life, where the almighty and eternal God sits, surrounded by the angels and archangels and the redeemed of earth, we will meet again and see those noble and brave spirits who gave up their lives for their country's cause that night at Franklin, Tennessee. A life given for one's country is never lost. It blooms again beyond the grave in a land of beauty and of love. Hanging around the throne of sapphire and gold, a rich garland awaits the coming of him who died for his country. And when the horologe of time has struck its last note upon his dying brow, justice hands the record of life to mercy, and mercy pleads with Jesus, and God, for his sake, receives him in his eternal home beyond the skies at last and forever. Nashville. A few more scenes, my dear friends, and we close these memoirs. We marched toward the city of Nashville. We camped the first night at Brentwood. The next day we can see the fine old buildings of solid granite looming up on Capitol Hill, the capital of Tennessee. We can see the stars and stripes flying from the dome. Our pulse leaps with pride when we see the grand old architecture. We can hear the bugle call and the playing of the bands of the different regiments in the Federal lines. Now and then a shell is thrown into our midst from Fort Negley, but no attack or demonstrations on either side. We bivouac on the cold and hard frozen ground, and when we walk about, the echo of our footsteps sound like the echo of a tombstone. The earth is crusted with snow, and the wind from the northwest is piercing our very bones. We can see our ragged soldiers with sunken cheeks and famine-glistening eyes. Where were our generals? Alas, there were none. Not one single general out of Cheatham's division was left, not one. General B.F. Cheatham himself was the only surviving general of his old division. Nearly all our captains and colonels were gone. Companies mingled with companies, regiments with regiments, and brigades with brigades. A few raw-boned horses stood shivering under the ice-covered trees, nibbling the short, scanty grass. Being in range of the Federal guns from Fort Negley, we were not allowed to have fires at night, and our thin and ragged blankets were but poor protection against the cold, raw blasts of December weather, the coldest ever known. The cold stars seem to twinkle with unusual brilliancy, and the pale moon seems to be but one vast heap of frozen snow, which glimmers in the cold gray sky, and the air gets colder by its coming. Our breath, forming in little rays, seems to make 1,000 little coruscations that scintillate in the cold, frosty air. I can tell you nothing of what was going on among the generals, but there we were, and that is all that I can tell you. One morning, about daylight, our army began to move. Our division was then on the extreme right wing, and then we were transferred to the left wing. The battle had begun. We were continually moving to our left. We would build little temporary breastworks, then we would be moved to another place. Our lines kept on widening out and stretching further and further apart until it was not more than a skeleton of a skirmish line from one end to the other. We started at a run. We cared for nothing. Not more than 1,000 yards off we could see the Yankee cavalry, artillery, and infantry marching apparently still further to our left. We could see regiments advancing at double quick across the fields, while with our army everything seemed confused. The private soldier could not see into things. It seemed to be somewhat like a flock of wild geese where they've lost their leader. We were willing to go anywhere or to follow anyone who would lead us. We were anxious to flee, fight, or fortify. I have never seen an army so confused and demoralized. The whole thing seemed to be tottering and trembling when, halt, front, right dress, and Adjutant McKinley reads us the following order. Soldiers, the commanding general takes pleasure in announcing to his troops that victory and success are now within their grasp, and the commanding general feels proud and gratified that in every attack and assault the enemy have been repulsed, and the commanding general will further say to his noble and gallant troops, be of good cheer, all is well. General John B. Hood, General Commanding. Kinloch Falconer, Acting Adjutant General. I remember how this order was received. Every soldier said, "Oh, shucks, that is all shenanigan," for we knew that we had never met the enemy or fired a gun outside of a little skirmishing, and I will further state that that battle order announcing success and victory was the cause of a greater demoralization than if our troops had actually engaged in battle. They at once mistrusted General Hood's judgment as a commander, and every private soldier in the whole army knew the situation of affairs. I remember, when passing by Hood, how feeble and decrepit he looked, with an arm in a sling and a crutch in the other hand, and trying to guide and control his horse. And, reader, I was not a Christian then, and I am but little better today. But as God sees my heart tonight, I prayed in my heart that day for General Hood. Poor fellow, I loved him, not as a general, but as a good man. I knew that when that army order was read, that General Hood had been deceived, and that the poor fellow was only trying to encourage his men. Every impulse of his nature was but to do good, and to serve his country as best he could. Ah, reader, some day all will be well. We continued marching toward our left, our battle line getting thinner and thinner. We could see the Federals advancing, their blue coats and banners flying, and we could see their movements and hear them giving their commands. Our regiment was ordered to double quick to the extreme left wing of the army, and we had to pass up a steep hill, and the dead grass was wet and as slick as glass, and it was with the greatest difficulty that we could get up that steep hillside. When we got to the top, we, as skirmishers, were ordered to deploy still further to the left. Billy Carr and J.E. Jones, two as brave soldiers as ever breathed the breath of life — in fact, it was given up that they were the bravest and most daring men in the Army of Tennessee — and myself, were on the very extreme left wing of our army. While we were deployed as skirmishers, I heard, "Surrender! Surrender!" and on looking around us I saw that we were right in the midst of a Yankee line of battle. They were lying down in the bushes, and we were not looking for them so close to us. We immediately threw down our guns and surrendered. J.E. Jones was killed at the first discharge of their guns, when another Yankee raised up and took deliberate aim at Billy Carr and fired, the ball striking him below the eye and passing through his head. As soon as I could, I picked up my gun, and as the Yankee turned, I sent a Minnie ball crushing through his head, and broke and run. But I am certain that I killed the Yankee who killed Billy Carr. But it was too late to save the poor boy's life. As I started to run, a fallen dogwood tree tripped me up, and I fell over the log. It was all that saved me. The log was riddled with balls, and thousands, it seemed to me, passed over it. As I got up to run again, I was shot through the middle finger of the very hand that is now penning these lines, and the thigh. But I had just killed a Yankee, and I was determined to get away from there as soon as I could. How I did get back I hardly know, for I was wounded and surrounded by Yankees. One rushed forward, and placing the muzzle of his gun in 2 feet of me, discharged it, but it missed its aim when I ran at him, grabbing him by the collar, and brought him off a prisoner. Captain Joe P. Lee and Colonel H. R. Field remember this, as would Lieutenant Colonel John L. House, were he alive, and all the balance of Company H who were there at the time. I had 8 bullet holes in my coat and 2 in my hand, besides the one in my thigh and finger. It was a hailstorm of bullets. The above is true in every particular, and it is but one incident of the war, which happened to hundreds of others. But alas, all our valor and victories were in vain, when God and the whole world were against us. Billy Carr was one of the bravest and best men I ever knew. He never knew what fear was, and in consequence of his reckless bravery had been badly wounded at Perryville, Murfreesboro, Chickamauga, the Octagon House, Dead Angle, and the 22nd of July at Atlanta. In every battle he was wounded, and finally, in the very last battle of the war, surrendered up his life for his country's cause. No father and mother of such a brave and gallant boy should ever sorrow or regret having borne to them such a son. He was the flower and chivalry of his company. He was as good as he was brave. His bones rest yonder on the Overton Hills today, while I have no doubt in my own mind that his spirit is with the Redeemer of the hosts of heaven. He was my friend. Poor boy, farewell. When I got back to where I could see our lines, it was one scene of confusion and rout. Finney's Florida Brigade had broken before a mere skirmish line, and soon the whole army had caught the infection, had broken, and were running in every direction. Such a scene I never saw. The army was panic-stricken. The woods everywhere were full of running soldiers. Our officers were crying, "Halt! Halt!" and trying to rally and reform their broken ranks. The Federals would dash their cavalry in amongst us, and even their cannon joined in the charge. One piece of Yankee artillery galloped past me, right on the road, unlimbered their gun, fired a few shots, and galloped ahead again. Hood's whole army was routed and in full retreat. Nearly every man in the entire army had thrown away his gun and accoutrements. More than 10,000 had stopped and allowed themselves to be captured, while many, dreading the horrors of a northern prison, kept on. And I saw many, yea, even thousands, broken down from sheer exhaustion, with despair and pity written on their features. Wagon trains, cannon, artillery, cavalry, and infantry were all blended in inextricable confusion. Broken down and jaded horses and mules refused to pull, and the badly scared drivers looked like their eyes would pop out of their heads from fright. Wagon wheels, interlocking each other, soon clogged the road, and wagons, horses, and provisions were left indiscriminately. The officers soon became affected with the demoralization of their troops and rode on in dogged indifference. General Frank Cheatham and General Loring tried to form a line at Brentwood, but the line they formed was like trying to stop the current of Duck River with a fish net. I believe the army would have rallied, had there been any colors to rally to, and as the straggling army moves on down the road, every now and then we can hear the sullen roar of the Federal artillery booming in the distance. I saw a wagon and team abandoned, and I unhitched one of the horses and rode on horseback to Franklin, where a surgeon tied up my broken finger and bandaged up my bleeding thigh. My boot was full of blood, and my clothing saturated with it. I was at General Hood's headquarters. He was much agitated and affected, pulling his hair with his one hand, he had but one, and crying like his heart would break. I pitied him, poor fellow. I asked him for a wounded furlough, and he gave it to me. I never saw him afterward. I always loved and honored him, and I will ever revere and cherish his memory. He gave his life in the service of his country, and I know today he wears a garland of glory beyond the grave, where justice says, "Well done," and mercy has erased all his errors and faults. I only write of the understrata of history, in other words, the private's history, as I saw things then and remember them now. The winter of 1864-5 was the coldest that had been known for many years. The ground was frozen and rough, and our soldiers were poorly clad, while many, yes, very many, were entirely barefooted. Our wagon trains had either gone on, we knew not whither, or had been left behind. Everything, and nature too, seemed to be working against us. Even the keen, cutting air that whistled through our tattered clothes and over our poorly covered heads seemed to lash us in its fury. The floods of waters that had overflowed their banks seemed to laugh at our calamity and to mock us and our misfortunes. All along the route were weary and footsore soldiers. The citizens seemed to shrink and hide from us as we approached them, and to cap the climax, Tennessee River was overflowing its banks, and several Federal gunboats were anchored just below Muscle Shoals, firing at us while crossing. The once proud Army of Tennessee had degenerated into a mob. We were pinched by hunger and cold. The rains and sleet and snow never ceased falling from the winter sky, while the winds pierced the old ragged, gray-backed rebel soldier to his very marrow. The clothing of many were hanging about them in shreds of rags and tatters, while an old slouched hat covered their frozen ears. Some were on old raw-boned horses without saddles. Honorable Jefferson Davis perhaps made blunders and mistakes, but I honestly believe that he ever did what he thought best for the good of his country, and there never lived on this earth from the days of Hampton to George Washington a purer patriot or a nobler man than Jefferson Davis, and like Marius, grand even in ruins. Hood was a good man, a kind man, a philanthropic man, but he is both harmless and defenseless now. He was a poor general in the capacity of commander-in-chief. Had he been mentally qualified, his physical condition would have disqualified him. His legs and one of his arms had been shot off in the defense of his country. As a soldier, he was brave, good, noble, and gallant, and fought with the ferociousness of the wounded tiger and with the everlasting grit of the bulldog. But as a general, he was a failure in every particular. Our country is gone, our cause is lost. Actum est de Republica. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Company Aytch by Sam R. Watkins. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Surrender. The last act of the drama. On the 10th day of May, 1861, our regiment, the 1st Tennessee, left Nashville for the camp of instruction with 1,250 men, officers, and line. Other recruits continually coming in swelled this number to 1,400. In addition to this, Major Fulker's battalion of 4 companies with 400 men originally was afterwards attached to the regiment, and the 27th Tennessee Regiment was afterwards consolidated with the 1st.
And besides this, there were about 200 conscripts added to the regiment from time to time. To recapitulate, the 1st Tennessee, numbering originally 1,250, recruited from time to time 150, Fulker's battalion 400, the 27th Tennessee 1,200, number of conscripts at the lowest estimate 200, making the sum total 3,200 men that belonged to our regiment during the war. The above I think a low estimate. Well, on the 26th day of April, 1865, General Joe E. Johnson surrendered his army at Greensboro, North Carolina. The day that we surrendered our regiment, it was a pitiful sight to behold. If I remember correctly, there were just 65 men in all, including officers, that were paroled on that day. Now, what had become of the original 3,200? A grand army, you may say, 3,200 men. Only 65 left. Now, reader, you may draw your own conclusions. It lacked just 4 days of 4 years from the day we were sworn in to the day of the surrender, and it was just 4 years and 24 days from the time that we left home for the army to the time that we got back again. It was indeed a sad sight to look at, the old 1st Tennessee Regiment, a mere squad of noble and brave men gathered around the tattered flag that they had followed in every battle through that long war. It was so bullet-riddled and torn that it was but a few blue and red shreds that hung drooping while it, too, was stacked with our guns forever. Thermopylae had one messenger of defeat, but when General Joe E. Johnson surrendered the Army of the South, there were hundreds of regiments, yea, I might safely say thousands, that had not a representative on the 26th day of April, 1865. Our cause was lost from the beginning. Our greatest victories, Chickamauga and Franklin, were our greatest defeats. Our people were divided upon the question of Union and secession. Our generals were scrambling for who ranked. The private soldier fought and starved and died for naught. Our hospitals were crowded with sick and wounded, but half provided with food and clothing to sustain life. Our money was depreciated to naught, and our cause lost. We left our homes 4 years previous. Amid the waving of flags and handkerchiefs, and the smiles of the ladies, while the fife and drum were playing Dixie and the bonny blue flag, we bid farewell to home and friends. The bones of our brave Southern boys lie scattered over our loved South. They fought for their country, and they gave their lives freely for that country's cause. And now they who survive sit like Marius amid the wreck of Carthage, sublime even in ruins. Other pens, abler than mine, will have to chronicle their glorious deeds of valor and devotion. In these sketches I have named but a few persons who fought side by side with me during that long and unholy war. In looking back over these pages, I ask, where now are many whose names have appeared in these sketches? They are up yonder, and are no doubt waiting and watching for those of us who are left behind. And, my kind reader, the time is coming when we too will be called, while the archangel of death is beating the long roll of eternity, and with us it will be the last reveille. God himself will sound the assembly on yonder beautiful and happy shore, where we will again have a grand reconfederation. We shed a tear over their flower-strewn graves. We live after them. We love their memory yet. But one generation passes away, and another generation follows. We know our loved and brave soldiers. We love them yet. But when we pass away, the impartial historian will render a true verdict, and a history will then be written in justification and vindication of those brave and noble boys who gave their all in fighting the battles of their homes, their country, and their God. The United States has no North, no South, no East, no West. We are one and undivided. Adieu. My kind friends, soldiers, comrades, brothers all, the curtain is rung down, the footlights are put out, the audience is all left and gone home, the seats are vacant, and the cold walls are silent.
The gaudy tinsel that appears before the footlights is exchanged for the dress of the citizen. Coming generations and historians will be the critics as to how we have acted our parts. The past is buried in oblivion. The blood-red flag, with its crescent and cross that we followed for 4 long, bloody, and disastrous years, has been folded, never again to be unfurled. We have no regrets for what we did, but we mourn the loss of so many brave and gallant men who perished on the field of battle and honor. I now bid you an affectionate adieu. But in closing these memoirs, the scenes of my life pass in rapid review before me. In imagination, I am young again tonight. I feel the flush and vigor of my manhood, am just 21 years of age. I hear the fife and drum playing Dixie and Bonnie Blue Flag. I see and hear our fire-eating stumperators tell of the right of secession and disunion. I see our fair and beautiful women waving their handkerchiefs and encouraging their sweethearts to go to the war. I see the marshalling of the hosts for glorious war. I see the fine banners waving and hear the cry everywhere, "To arms, to arms." And I see our country at peace and prosperous, our fine cities look grand and gay, our fields rich in abundant harvests, our people happy and contented. All these pass in imagination before me. Then I look and see glorious war in all its splendor. I hear the shout and charge, the boom of artillery and the rattle of small arms. I see gaily dressed officers charging backwards and forwards upon their mettled war horses, clothed in the panoply of war. I see victory and conquest upon flying banners. I see our arms triumph in every battle. And oh, my friends, I see another scene. I see broken homes and broken hearts. I see war in all its desolation. I see a country ruined and impoverished. I see a nation disenfranchised and maltreated. I see a commonwealth forced to pay dishonest and fraudulent bonds that were issued to crush that people. I see sycophants licking the boots of their country's oppressor. I see other and many wrongs perpetrated upon a conquered people. But maybe it is but the ghosts and phantoms of a dreamy mind, or the wind as it whistles around our lonely cabin home. The past is buried in oblivion. The mantle of charity has long ago fallen upon those who think differently from us. We remember no longer wrongs and injustice done us by anyone on earth. We are willing to forget and forgive those who have wronged and falsified us. We look up above and beyond all those petty, groveling things and shake hands and forget the past. And while my imagination is like the weaver's shuttle, playing backward and forward through these 2 decades of time, I ask myself, are these things real? Did they happen? Are they being enacted today? Or are they the fancies of the imagination and forgetful reverie? Is it true that I have seen all these things? That they are real incidents in my life's history? Did I see those brave and noble countrymen of mine laid low in death and weltering in their blood? Did I see our country laid waste and in ruins? Did I see soldiers marching, the earth trembling and jarring beneath their measured tread? Did I see the ruins of smoldering cities and deserted homes? Did I see my comrades buried and see the violet and wild flowers bloom over their graves? Did I see the flag of my country that I had followed so long, furled to be no more unfurled forever? Surely they are but the vagaries of mine own imagination. Surely my fancies are running wild tonight. But hush! I now hear the approach of battle. That low, rumbling sound in the west is the roar of cannon in the distance. That rushing sound is the tread of soldiers. That quick, lurid glare is the flash that precedes the cannon's roar. And listen! That loud report that makes the earth tremble and jar and sway is but the bursting of a shell as it screams through the dark, tempestuous night. That black ebon cloud where the lurid lightning flickers and flares that is rolling through the heavens is the smoke of battle. Beneath is being enacted a carnage of blood and death. Listen! The soldiers are charging now. The flashes and roaring now are blending with the shouts of soldiers and the confusion of battle. But, reader, time has brought his changes since I, a young, ardent, and impetuous youth, burning with a lofty patriotism, first shouldered my musket to defend the rights of my country. Lifting the veil of the past, I see many manly forms, bright in youth and hope, standing in view by my side in Company H, 1st Tennessee Regiment. Again I look, and half those forms are gone. Again, and gray locks and wrinkled faces and clouded brows stand before me. Before me, too, I see not in imagination, but in reality, my own loved Jenny, the partner of my joys and the sharer of my sorrows, sustaining, comforting, and cheering my pathway by her benignant smile, pouring the sunshine of domestic comfort and happiness upon our humble home, making life more worth the living as we toil on up the hill of time together, with the bright pledges of our early and constant love by our side, while the sunlight of hope ever brightens our pathway, dispelling darkness and sorrow, as we hand in hand approach the valley of the great shadow. The tale is told. The world moves on. The sun shines as brightly as before, the flowers bloom as beautifully, the birds sing their carols as sweetly, the trees nod and bow their leafy tops as if slumbering in the breeze, the gentle winds fan our brow and kiss our cheek as they pass by, the pale moon sheds her silvery sheen, the blue dome of the sky sparkles with the trembling stars that twinkle and shine and make night beautiful, and the scene melts and gradually disappears forever. End of Chapter 17. End of Company H by Sam R. Watkins. Recording by Winston Tharp.